Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's topic is super exciting. As you saw in the title, what if Deku awakened as the Shadow Monarch and ruled the darkness? So before we begin, make sure to hit that subscribe button, smash the like button, and comment your thoughts down below. Now let's jump straight into this epic fanfiction. Chapter 1. The Quiet Before the Storm. The sky over Musutafu was the color of a fading bruise. Purple bled into deep indigo, pierced by the first sharp, cold stars. Izuku Midoriya stood on the rooftop of his apartment building. The familiar sounds of the city a distant murmur below. The wind pulled at his green curls, but he didn't feel the chill. He felt nothing but a hollow, echoing space where his dream used to be. The words from the morning's training at UA still rang in his ears, a tinny, relentless loop. All Might's booming voice, strained with a concern he tried to hide. "You're trying too hard to mimic my style, young Midoriya. Your body is breaking because you won't listen to its limits." He had smiled, of course. He had bowed and promised to do better. But the smile had felt like cracked plaster on his face. Inside, the fear was a living thing, coiling around his lungs. He wasn't enough. One for all was a storm contained within his brittle bones, and every time he summoned it, he was the one who shattered. His right hand, still wrapped in bandages from yesterday's fracture, throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. He flexed the fingers, watching the white cloth stain with the last light. The doctors said it would heal. They always said that. They didn't understand that the real fracture was deeper. It was the splintering of a promise. "I have to be better," he whispered to the gathering dark. The words were stolen by the wind. "I have to be worthy." A sudden, violent shiver racked his body. This was different from the cold. It started in the marrow of his bones, a deep, invasive chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. He gasped, his breath frosting in front of him. The rooftop beneath his feet seemed to waver. The distant neon lights blurred, stretching into long, smeared ribbons of color. He stumbled back, clutching his chest. His heart wasn't beating. It was thrumming asterisk, a frantic, alien rhythm that vibrated through his entire being. The hollow space inside him wasn't empty anymore. Something was pouring in. Something cold and ancient and vast. Images, jagged and sharp, stabbed behind his eyes. Not his own memories. A throne of obsidian, floating in an endless void. Armies of shifting darkness, kneeling in silent, eternal fealty. A whisper, not in his ears, but in the very fabric of his soul. A voice of gravel and crumbling stone. Asterisk, the vessel is ready. Asterisk. Pain exploded behind his temples. Izuku cried out, falling to his knees on the rough concrete. The world dissolved into shadows. Not the gentle shadows of dusk, but living, grasping tendrils of absolute black. They swirled from his own body, pouring from his mouth, his eyes, his hands. They wrapped around him, not as a prison, but as a second skin. A mantle. The fear was gone, burned away in an instant. In its place was a silence so profound it was deafening. A calm, terrible certainty. He looked at his bandaged hand. The shadows coiled around it, and the cloth disintegrated into nothingness. The skin beneath was whole, unblemished. The ache was gone. He stood up. The movement was effortless. He felt no strain, no tremor. He felt anchored, as if the very darkness beneath him was holding him up. He looked out over the city again. His vision had changed. He could see the thermal warmth of life in the buildings below, vague, glowing shapes of people in their homes. But he could also see the negative spaces, the pools of deep shadow in alleyways, beneath bridges, in the corners of lit rooms. They called to him. They were his. A sound broke the silence, a choked gasp from the alleyway 3 stories below. Izuku's head turned, the motion smooth and precise. His eyes, now glowing with a faint, ethereal emerald light, pierced the gloom. A woman was being backed against a wall by 2 figures. One had a mutation quirk, his fingers elongated into sharp blades. The other crackled with weak bioelectricity. Muggers. Common. Beneath the notice of a hero on patrol. Izuku didn't think. He simply willed. The shadow at his feet rippled. 2 shapes detached themselves from it, rising like black smoke given form. They were humanoid, but featureless, silhouettes cut from the night itself. They stood at attention before him, waiting. He felt no surprise, only a deep, instinctual understanding. These were his soldiers, an extension of his will. He pointed a single finger toward the alley. The shadows sank back into the rooftop and vanished. A heartbeat later, he saw them, two pools of darkness flowing up the alley walls behind the assailants. They solidified, silent, swift. The muggers didn't have time to scream. The shadows enveloped them, not with violence, but with an absorbing embrace. One moment they were there, the next, they were gone. Swallowed by the dark, the woman slid down the wall, eyes wide with shock, staring at the empty space where her attackers had stood. Izuku felt it, a tiny, almost insignificant spark of energy returning to him. The shadows that had taken the muggers reappeared on the rooftop, kneeling once more. But they were slightly more defined now. He could sense their stolen quirks, dormant, stored within them. Tools in his arsenal. He had just used his power. He hadn't broken a bone. He hadn't even moved. The silence within him shattered. Not with fear, but with a torrent of terrifying, exhilarating questions. What was this? Where did one for all go? Was this him? He looked at his hands, now wreathed in gentle, caressing darkness. The symbol of peace smiled from a giant billboard in the distance, a beacon of light. Izuku Midoriya, the boy who dreamed of that light, felt a new kind of power humming in his veins. It was quiet, it was cold, it was absolute, and as the last of the daylight died, he understood one thing with perfect, chilling clarity. He would never be the same. On the rooftop, surrounded by kneeling shadows, the boy who wanted to be a hero tilted his head back and stared into the starless patch of sky above him. The void stared back. It felt like home. A single, ice-cold tear traced a path down his cheek. It evaporated into a wisp of black smoke before it could reach his jaw. The first chapter of his story had ended. A new, darker volume had just begun. Chapter 2. The Echo in the Silence. The walk home was a journey through a world remade. Every street lamp cast a pool of light that felt aggressive, glaring. Izuku moved through the spaces between them, his sneakers making no sound on the pavement. The shadows clung to him, not visibly, but as a pressure, a presence. A silent congregation followed him in the underworld of the city, in the storm drains, the spaces beneath parked cars, the long, dark scars between buildings. They whispered without sound. They waited. His apartment door clicked shut behind him, the familiar sound a gunshot in the stifling quiet. The normalcy of the entryway, the smell of his mother's cooking from earlier, the sight of his own scuffed red shoes lined up neatly, was a surreal painting. A scene from someone else's life. Izuku, is that you, sweetie? Inko's voice, warm with concern, floated from the living room. Why yes, Mom. His own voice was foreign, steady, flat. The old stammer was gone, burned away in that rooftop crucible. He cleared his throat, trying to inject some warmth into it. I'm back. He stepped into the living room. Inko was on the sofa, a blanket over her lap, looking up from the television. Her smile was gentle, but her eyes, the same green as his, scanned him with a mother's radar. He saw the moment her gaze caught on his hand. The missing bandages, the unmarked skin. Your hand, she said, setting her tea down. The bandages, they got dirty. I took 'em off. The lie was ash in his mouth. He never lied to his mother. It feels a lot better. Must have just been a bad sprain. She studied him, the worry lines around her eyes deepening. You look pale, honey. And your eyes, they seem a little tired. They're seeing the void, Mom. They're seeing what's living inside me now. Asterisk. He forced a smile, the plaster crack feeling returning. Long day of training. I'm just going to go study, okay? Don't stay up too late. Her voice followed him down the hall, a tether to a world that was slipping away. In his room, with the door closed, the world sharpened again. The comforting clutter, the All Might posters, the shelves of hero analysis notebooks, felt like museum exhibits, artifacts of a dead faith. He stood in the center of the room, feeling the new power slumbering beneath his skin. It was a deep, still ocean. One for all was there too, he realized, a distant, golden sun submerged in that ocean's depths, its light strained and muted. He held up a hand. He didn't command. He simply wondered. A tendril of darkness, no thicker than a pencil, peeled from the shadow of his desk and spiraled through the air. It was cool to the touch, like silk made of midnight. It wrapped around his finger, obedient, sentient. He willed it to shape, to become. It flattened, hardened, forming a perfect, miniature replica of All Might's helmet. The detail was immaculate. Then it melted, reforming into the shape of a rose, then a tiny, intricate dragon that coiled around his wrist. He was breathing hard, but not from exertion. From awe, from terror. This control, it was instinctual, effortless, like flexing a muscle he never knew he had. His phone buzzed on the desk. The screen lit up with a news notification. Mysterious disappearance in MUSUTAFU. Local muggers vaporize. Witness describes living shadows. His blood ran cold. He opened the article. A grainy photo of the alley. A quote from the shaken woman. They just dissolved. The shadows ate them. Police were baffled, speculating on an unknown quirk. He had dissolved people. He had soldiers made of darkness kneeling in the unseen corners of his room. He was a sovereign of something he did not understand. A different kind of chill seized him. Not from the power, but from the consequence. He sat heavily on his bed, the shadows recoiling back to their sources as his concentration broke. He put his head in his hands. What have I done? Asterisk. The question echoed in the new silence within him. No answer came, only the profound, patient stillness. Sleep did not come. It was a human necessity his body seemed to have transcended. He lay in the dark, and the dark was alive to him. He could feel the pulse of the neighborhood through it, the restless dreams, the late-night workers, the small, scurrying lives of rodents and insects. It was a vast, whispering network, and he was its nexus. A pressure built at the edge of his awareness. A sharp, discordant note in the quiet symphony of the night. It came from a few blocks away, a flavor of aggression, of cruel intent. It felt like the muggers, but stronger, more vicious. Izuku was out of bed and at the window in a fluid motion. He didn't decide to move. His body acted on the impulse of the Shadow Kingdom he now sensed. He looked out. Nothing amiss. Just quiet streets. But he could feel it. A robbery. An assault. It was a direction. A pull. You must see. Asterisk. The gravel voice in his soul was not a voice. It was an impulse. An ancient knowledge rising. He let his consciousness flow into the shadow beneath his window. For a moment, his vision split. He was both Izuku in his room, and he was the shadow, slipping down the wall like viscous oil, flowing along the gutter and into the street. The world through the shadow's senses was monochrome, thermal, and profoundly intimate. He felt the texture of the asphalt, the chill of the concrete. He moved faster than thought, a silent streak of blackness against blackness. He found the source in a closed convenience store parking lot. 3 figures, quirks evident, one with hardened stone skin, another with telescopic eyes, a third whose hands dripped a sizzling acid. They were laughing, stacking stolen goods, while the store owner lay on the ground, clutching a bleeding head. Rage, hot and human, flared in Izuku's chest. This, he understood, this was wrong. His shadow form hovered at the edge of the lot. His will reached back, to the apartment, to the deeper darkness of his closet, under his bed. He called. In his room, Izuku's physical body stood still, eyes glowing faintly. From every corner, the shadows congealed. 2, then 4, then 6 of his silent soldiers peeled from the walls and floor. They stepped into a deeper patch of darkness in the room and vanished. In the parking lot, they emerged from the shadows cast by the broken store sign. The thugs froze. The one with telescopic eyes gaped. What the hell are those? They were more defined now. Their outlines hinted at the muggers they'd absorbed, but they were taller, more solid. Instruments of a single will. Izuku, through his shadow, gave no spoken order. He simply willed restraint. The shadows moved. They were a blur of silent efficiency. One flowed around the stone-skinned man, not attacking his body, but enveloping his head, cutting off air, sight, sound. The man thrashed, his quirk zealous against an enemy with no solid form to strike. The acidic-handed one shrieked and flung his corrosive liquid, but the shadow soldier simply parted around the spray, reforming behind him, and his legs out from under him with a sweep of darkness that solidified for a split second. The third tried to run. A shadow extended from the ground itself, wrapping around his ankles like chains and yanking him down. It was over in 10 seconds. The 3 assailants lay unconscious, restrained by coils of living darkness. The store owner stared, trembling. Izuku's shadow form lingered. He looked at the fallen men. The impulse was there again, clearer now. A hunger not his own, but one that lived within his power. The monarch's right, to claim the strong, to increase the army, number, asterisk. The refusal was purely Izuku Midoriya, the boy who believed in saving everyone. He withdrew. The shadows holding the thugs retreated, melting back into the environment, leaving them bound with ordinary electrical cords ripped from the store's sign. The shadow soldiers bowed toward the empty space where Izuku's consciousness had been, and faded away. Back in his body, Izuku gasped, stumbling back from the window. The sensory overload was immense. He had been in two places at once. He had commanded an army. He had almost taken lives into his service. Permanently. He sank to the floor, his back against the wall. The darkness in the room felt comforting now, a blanket. His breathing slowed. He had done good. He had stopped a crime, without violence, without breaking himself. He had saved someone, but the method, the cold, ruthless efficiency of it, the terrifying ease, the hunger, a soft knock on his door made his heart lurch. Izuku. Inko's voice was hushed with worry. I thought I heard something. Are you okay? He looked at the shadows in his room. They were just shadows again. I'm fine, Mom, he said, his voice quiet but clear. Just a bad dream. He heard her sigh softly through the door. Okay, honey, try to get some rest. As her footsteps retreated, Izuku looked down at his hands. He clenched them into fists. No crackle of green energy. Only the faintest shimmer of blackness, like heat haze, for a moment around his knuckles. He had power now, real power, enough to be a hero. But as he sat there in the quiet dark, the line between hero and sovereign, between saving and claiming, felt thinner than a shadow's edge. And in the deepest part of his soul, the part that was no longer entirely his own, the throne of obsidian waited. It was patient. It knew he would sit upon it eventually. The night deepened. Izuku Midoriya did not sleep. He watched the dawn approach, not with hope, but with the watchful eyes of a king surveying a kingdom he never asked for. The first rays of sunlight touched his window, and the shadows in the corner of his room did not vanish. They deepened, defiant, waiting for their monarch's next command. Chapter 3. The Stain of Daylight. UA. High in the morning was a temple of light and sound. Sunlight streamed through the massive windows of the hallways, gleaming off polished floors. The chatter of students, boasts about quirks, gossip about heroes. The nervous energy of impending classes was a constant, vibrant hum. Izuku walked through it, and it was like moving through a dream made of glass. He felt transparent, separate. The echoes of last night's shadow play clung to him, a film of otherness he couldn't scrub off. The warmth of the sun on his skin felt distant, muted, as if he were observing it from behind a thick pane of obsidian. Deku. The voice was a lifeline. Uraraka Okiko bounced towards him, her smile as bright and genuine as the morning. For a second, the ice around his heart cracked. Good morning. Ready for foundational heroes studies today. I heard we might be doing rescue scenarios. Oh, yeah, Izuku managed, the old stammer returning as a weak mimicry of his past self. He focused on her face, on the friendly concern in her brown eyes. He had to be normal. He had to be Izuku. Rescue scenarios. That sounds good. You don't sound too sure, she laughed, falling into step beside him. Still thinking about All Might's lecture yesterday. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Don't worry about it. You'll figure out your own style. You always do. His own style. The thought was a cold stone in his gut. If she knew what his own style was now. Midoriya. Uraraka. The voice was flat, monotone. Shoto Todoroki stood by the classroom door, his heterochromatic eyes fixed on Izuku. There was an intensity in that gaze, a searching quality that made the shadows in Izuku's soul stir uneasily. Todoroki-kun, Izuku nodded, trying for a smile. Todoroki's eyes PPED for a fraction of a second to Izuku's unmarked, bandage-free hands. Your injury healed quickly. It wasn't a question. It was an observation that felt like an accusation. Izuku's mind raced. 2. Doroki was the most observant person in class, next to maybe Yaoyorozu. He saw things others missed. It wasn't as bad as it looked, Izuku said, the lie tasting bitter. Just a sprain. Todoroki held his gaze for a moment longer. then gave a slight, unreadable nod and entered the classroom. The chill he left behind had nothing to do with his ice quirk. The classroom was a gauntlet of normalcy. Kaminari and Ashido were debating the best hero merch. Ida chopped the air with precise, robotic gestures as he discussed the importance of punctuality. Bakugo sat at his desk, scowling at the window, his usual explosive aura simmering. He didn't even glance at Izuku. That, somehow, was worse than his usual hostility. It was as if Bakugo's instincts, sharp as razors, had already dismissed the old Deku and found nothing yet to replace him. Aizawa-sensei entered, a slumped-over harbinger of doom in his yellow sleeping bag. The class quieted instantly. Your performance in battle training has been variable, he began, his tired eyes scanning them. Power is useless without control. Instinct is worthless without strategy. Today, we test control. He explained the exercise. It was deceptively simple. A massive, labyrinthine gymnasium had been set up with hundreds of fragile, sensor-tagged ceramic plates suspended at various heights. The objective was to navigate the course, a series of platforms, tightropes, and moving obstacles, without breaking a single plate. Quirk use was permitted, even encouraged, but only for movement and precision. Any plate broken meant immediate failure. This isn't about strength, Aizawa droned. It's about finesse, about understanding the limits of your power down to the millimeter. Bakugo, you're up first. Try not to reduce the training ground to rubble. Bakugo snarled, stomping out to the entrance. He exploded through the course with terrifying, brute force agility. Plates shook on their wires. He broke 7. Ida was next, his engines whirring at careful, minimal output. He broke 2. Uraraka used her zero gravity on herself, floating gently through like a feather. She broke none. A perfect run. As Izuku watched, his anxiety grew. This was the antithesis of his new power. Shadows weren't gentle. They were consuming. They were absolute. How did one command the darkness to be delicate? Midoriya. His name was a death knell. Every eye turned to him. He saw the expectation in some, the pity in others. They were waiting for the crack of bones, the burst of green lightning, the destructive power he could unleash. He walked to the starting platform. The gym stretched before him, a forest of fragile ceramics. The lights were bright, but they cast deep, complex shadows across the strange terrain. He could feel them. Each one was a pool of potential, a whisper of cool strength. He couldn't use one for all. Not here, not like this. It would shatter everything, including him. But the other power, it hummed, eager. Use us. Asterisk the silence within him seemed to say. We are precision. We are extension. Asterisk. He took a breath, emptying his mind of the watching eyes, of Aizawa's scrutiny, of All Might's disappointed gaze. He thought only of the first platform, 5 meters away. He didn't jump. He stepped. A ribbon of solid darkness shot from the shadow at his feet, forming a flat, narrow bridge just wide enough for his shoe. It was utterly black, matte, absorbing the light around it. He walked across it. It felt as solid as concrete, but it made no sound. Not a whisper. A collective, sharp intake of breath echoed from his classmates. He reached the platform. The shadow bridge dissolved behind him. He looked ahead. A series of swinging pendulums with plates dangling between them. No space for a human body to pass. Izuku didn't hesitate. He dropped. Instead of falling, the shadow beneath the platform rose up to meet him, cradling him in a sling of darkness. He willed it forward, a silent, swift glide. That carried him through the pendulum arcs with inches to spare. The shadows moved with him, flowing like water, reacting to his slightest mental twitch. He was not using brute force. He was conducting a symphony of absence. He passed through the most difficult section, a dense cluster of plates hanging in a chaotic cloud. Uraraka had floated over it. Ida had painstakingly picked a path. Bakugo had blasted through and broken half of them. Izuku stopped. He closed his eyes. From the shadows on the far wall, 10 thin, needle-like tendrils extended. With impossible delicacy, they slipped between the plates, not touching a single one. They connected to the shadows at his feet. He stepped onto the first tendril. It held his weight without a tremor. He walked across the high wire made of living darkness, a tightrope walker with an invisible net made of void. The plates didn't even sway. He reached the end of the course. He turned. The shadows that had aided him sank back into the environment, leaving no trace. He had broken 0 plates. His body was unstrained. His breathing was even. The silence in the observation room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the lights. Aizawa-sensei was fully awake now, his capture weapon half unwound, his eyes wide and glowing red. His erasure quirk was active, but he was staring at Izuku with pure, unadulterated shock. It wasn't working. He wasn't cancelling anything, because the power wasn't coming from Izuku's body in a way his quirk could interrupt. It was coming from the world itself. Midoriya. Aizawa's voice was dangerously quiet. What was that? Izuku met his teacher's gaze. The words stuck in his throat. He saw All Might, in his smaller form, standing at the back of the observation room, his skeletal face pale with confusion and something that looked like dread. Izuku began. The truth was impossible. I've been working on a new application of my power, better control. That wasn't super strength, Aizawa stated. His quirk finally deactivating. The shadows in the room didn't change. They were just shadows. That was a completely different manifestation. A quirk evolution of this magnitude is unprecedented this late in your training. Report to Recovery Girl for a full workup. Now, and then to Principal Nezu. As Izuku walked off the course, the eyes of his classmates bored into him. Urarakas were wide with amazement. Iidas were analytical, confused. Todorokis were icy and knowing. Bakugos were a maelstrom of pure, unfiltered fury. He saw it. He saw the power that wasn't the stolen, brittle thing he hated. He saw something new, something controlled, and it made the veins in his temple throb. In the sterile white of Recovery Girl's office, the scans and tests revealed nothing. His cells were healthy. His bones were dense, unbroken. His energy signatures were anomalous, fluctuating between a familiar, vibrant frequency and something else, a deep, absorptive signature that the machines couldn't categorize. It's as if you have two quirk factors dancing in your system, dearie, Recovery Girl muttered, peering at a chart. But they're intertwined in a way I've never seen. One isn't eclipsing the other. They're coexisting. The walk to Nezu's office was the longest of his life. He passed a window overlooking the city. The sun was high, but for the first time, Izuku didn't see the light. He saw the shape of the darkness it created. He saw every potential foothold, every hiding place, every silent pathway. He was called inside. Nezu sat behind his desk, a cup of tea steaming in his paw. Aizawa and All Might were there, their faces grim. Midoriya shonen, All Might began, his voice strained. What is happening? The concern in his mentor's eyes was worse than any anger. Izuku opened his mouth, the words of denial ready. But the principal, who had been staring at him with black, beady eyes that missed nothing, spoke first. You're not lying, young man. That much is clear, Nezu said, his voice cheerful in a way that was utterly terrifying. But you are hiding something monumental. The shadows in the training gym didn't just obey you. They were you, an extension of your will that exists independent of your physical form. He sipped his tea. We have a report from the Musutafu police. A series of incidents involving assailants being subdued by living shadows. The descriptions are remarkably consistent with what we saw today. All Might's head whipped towards Nezu, then back to Izuku. Young Midoriya, you didn't. I stopped a robbery last night, Izuku said. His voice quiet but firm. He looked at All Might. I stopped it without getting hurt. Without hurting anyone. I saved someone. By using a power that is not one for all, Aizawa stated. A power with profound and unknown ramifications. You took down those criminals. Where are they now? The question hung in the air. The memory of the hungry impulse, the desire to claim, to add them to the ranks of the silent soldiers, rose like a tide. Izuku met Aizawa's gaze. They're in police custody, sir. I left them tied up. It was the truth, but it was not the whole truth. He saw the doubt in Aizawa's eyes, the deep worry in All Might's. Nezu set his teacup down with a soft click. Until we understand the nature and origin of this evolution, your participation in public heroics exercises is suspended. You will continue academic studies. You will train under the direct supervision of both Aizawa and All Might in a secure, private facility. We must determine if this power is yours to control. He paused, his cheer fading into something solemn. Or if it is controlling you. The verdict was a cage of light and suspicion. As Izuku left the office, the directive ringing in his ears. He felt the darkness within him coil, restless, insulted by their fear. He walked back to the empty dorm common room, the bright UA sunlight feeling like a searchlight. He was a puzzle, a threat, a specimen. Alone in the quiet, he looked at his hand. He willed a single, small shadow to dance across his palm. It was beautiful. It was his, and it was the thing that was isolating him from everything he loved. The cliffhanger of the morning's triumph had collapsed into the cliffhanger of his own future. He was suspended between two worlds, belonging to neither, watched with fear by both. And in the back of his mind, the throne in the void seemed to shift, offering not comfort, but a simple, cold fact. They will never understand. They fear the dark. But you are learning to see in it. Chapter 4. The King in the Training Room. The private training facility was a vault. A vast, circular chamber deep beneath UA, lined with blast-proof panels and bathed in harsh, sterile white light designed to eliminate every shadow. It felt less like a gym and more like an interrogation cell, or a quarantine zone for something dangerous. Izuku stood in the center, small and exposed, feeling the light prickle against his skin like a physical aversion. Across from him, Aizawa-sensei and All Might stood like sentinels of two different worlds. Aizawa, wrapped in his capture weapon, eyes tired but sharp as scalpels. All Might, in his deflated form, wearing a simple tracksuit, his usual booming enthusiasm replaced by a tense, paternal worry that carved deep lines into his face. The objective today is assessment, not achievement, Aizawa began, his voice echoing in the empty space. We need to understand the mechanics, the limits, and the triggers of this new manifestation. You will follow our instructions precisely. No improvisation. Understood. Izuku nodded, his throat tight. Yes, sensei. First, All Might said, stepping forward, his voice softer. Can you still access one for all? Quote, that was the question, wasn't it? The golden legacy versus the encroaching dark. Izuku closed his eyes, reaching inward. He felt the ocean of stillness, the deep, cold power that had become his foundation. And there, submerged within it, was the sun. Distant, muffled. He reached for it. A flicker of green lightning crackled around his arm. It was weak, sputtering, like a faulty bulb. The familiar surge of energy was there, but it was hesitant, straining against the profound calm that now filled him. He willed it to 5%. The lightning steadied, covering his arm, but it felt thin. Insulated. The explosive, raw power was dampened, wrapped in layers of shadow. He threw a punch. The air whistled, but there was no shockwave, no burst of force. It was a powerful punch, but it was a contained one. All Might's eyes widened. You're holding back the backlash. The energy isn't damaging you. It's not reaching my bones, Izuku confirmed, letting the green energy fade. It felt like letting go of a whisper. It's filtered through the other power. Aizawa's eyes glowed red. Erasure activated. The green lightning on Izuku's arm vanished instantly. But the sense of inner stillness, the awareness of the shadows that weren't there in the overlit room, remained unchanged. Aizawa's brow furrowed. He held his gaze, his quirk at full strength. You feel that? Aizawa asked. I feel you trying to cancel something, Izuku said. But it's like you're trying to erase the night. You can turn off a light, but the darkness just is. Aizawa released his quirk, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. So it's not a standard emitter type quirk. It's ambient, environmental. Next test, All Might said, his expression grim. The new power, in a controlled manner, create something small, non-threatening. Izuku looked around. The light was absolute. There were no natural shadows to draw from. For a moment, he doubted. Then he remembered the feeling on the roof, the darkness pouring from within. He didn't need a shadow. He was a source. He held out his palm. He focused not on summoning, but on allowing. A small pool of utter blackness bloomed in his hand, as if he'd cupped a piece of a starless sky. It was cold, but not unpleasantly so. From it, a tiny, four-legged creature formed, a shadowy replica of a cat. It sat on his palm, tilted its head, and silently yawned. The sheer, mundane precision of it was more unsettling than any monster. All Might took an involuntary step back. Can you control it independently? Aizawa asked, his voice clinically detached. Izuku nodded. He willed the cat to jump. It leapt from his hand, landing silently on the floor 10 feet away. It walked a circle, tail flicking, then sat and began meticulously cleaning a paw made of solidified nothing. Remarkable, Izuku muttered, scribbling notes on a tablet. Semi-autonomous. Sensory feedback. I can feel the floor through its feet, Izuku said. Amazed himself. The texture. It's faint, like hearing something from another room. Now, reabsorb it. Izuku willed it. The cat dissolved into a wisp of smoke that streamed back into the palm of his hand. The cold energy settling back into his core. He felt a tiny replenishment, as if he'd taken a sip of water. Efficiency. Izuku noted. Nearly lossless conversion. Now, something larger. A combat form. But non-lethal. Restraint only. This was the test. The line. Izuku took a breath. He gestured to the empty space beside him. From the black pool at his OWN feet, a shadow cast by his own body despite the omnidirectional light, a soldier rose. It was humanoid, featureless, about his own height. It stood at attention, waiting. Command it to approach me and attempt to immobilize, Izuku said. Settling into a defensive stance. Izuku gave the mental order. The shadow moved. It was fast, a blur of silent motion. Izuku was faster. His capture scarf shot out, wrapping around the shadow's torso. But where it should have met resistance, the scarf passed through smoky insubstantiality. The shadow reformed behind Izuku, its arms extending into bands of darkness that tried to wrap around his arms. Izuku pivoted, his quirk flashing again. It did nothing. The shadow's grip tightened, not with crushing force, but with a steady, inescapable pressure. Izuku strained, his muscles corded. He couldn't break free. The shadow was strength made manifest, but it was a cold, impersonal strength. Enough, All Might said, his voice tense. Izuku willed the shadow to release. It instantly let go, stepping back and bowing its head slightly, as if in apology. Izuku rubbed his arms, staring at the creation with a mix of professional respect and deep unease. Physical intangibility on command, Izuku breathed. Selective solidity. That's a devastating combination. How many of these can you create? I don't know, Izuku admitted. The memory of the 6 from the previous night felt like a starting point, not a limit. Then we find out, All Might said, his face set. But not with these. Summon the ones you used last night. The ones that took the muggers. The air left the room. Izuku's heart hammered against the stillness inside him. They're different. How? Izuku's voice was a razor. They have the echoes of the quirks they took. The people. The admission felt like a confession of a crime. They're stronger. All Might's face paled further. You absorbed those men's quirks. Not absorbed. The shadows consumed them. The potential is stored. I can feel it. He looked at his teachers, desperation creeping into his voice. I didn't hurt them. They're alive. They're just quirkless now, I think. I don't. Summon one, Izuku ordered. Cutting through his panic, Izuku closed his eyes. He reached into that quiet, dark place within, to the corner where the 2 more defined soldiers waited. He called the one that had taken the blade-fingered mugger. Between him and his teachers, the darkness congealed. This shadow was taller, denser. Its outline was sharper, and along its arms, faint, jagged lines of dull gray hinted at the blade quirk it held. It knelt, and the room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. All Might took a defensive step in front of Izuku, his body tense. By the gods, command it to demonstrate the stored quirk, Izuku said, his eyes locked on the kneeling figure. Izuku gave the order. The shadow raised a hand. Its fingers elongated, not into flesh and bone, but into blades of pure, cutting darkness. They were longer, sharper, deadlier than the original muggers had ever been. It swept its hand through a nearby reinforced training dummy. The dummy's torso sheared in 2 with a soft shunk asterisk. The cut edges smooth and clean. The silence that followed was deafening. The implications hung in the air, heavier than any weapon. You can create an army, All Might whispered, horror dawning in his eyes. An army that steals the powers of your enemies and turns them against the next. Midoriya Shonen. This isn't a hero's quirk. This is the power of a warlord. The word was a physical blow. Izuku flinched. The shadow soldier dissipated, returning to its realm within him. It doesn't have to be, Izuku argued, his voice trembling. I used it to save people. I can choose how to use it. I can use it for good. Can you? Izuku asked, his voice low and relentless. Where is the line, Midoriya? You subdued those men and took something fundamental from them, permanently, without due process. Without consent. That's not capture. That's harvesting. He stepped closer, his dark eyes boring into Izuku's. What happens when you face a truly vile villain with a powerful, dangerous quirk? The temptation to add that strength to your own arsenal, to neutralize the threat, permanently, will be immense. This power, it encourages escalation. It rewards conquest. I won't. You already did, All Might said, his voice thick with a grief that was worse than anger. You crossed a line I never even dreamed existed. One for All is a power to save, to inspire. This is a power to rule, to dominate. He looked at Izuku, and the disappointment in his eyes was a desolate landscape. I trained you to be my successor. Not this. The words carved out the new, hollow space inside Izuku. He stood alone in the blinding light, the two men who represented his past and his present future looking at him as if he were a stranger. A threat. The training session was over. The verdict was clear. They feared what he was becoming. As he was led back to his supervised dorm room, the shadows that were absent in the hallways felt like phantom limbs. He was a king with no kingdom, a monarch imprisoned in the light. That night, locked in his room, he sat on the floor in the dark. He didn't summon soldiers. He simply let the shadows in the room breathe. A soft, almost inaudible tap came at his window. He looked up. Perched on the narrow ledge outside was a small, dark shape. Not a bird, a shadow sparrow, sleek and precise. It tilted its head, and a tiny, folded piece of paper, darker than the night around it, fell from its beak onto the inside windowsill before the creature melted away. Izuku unfolded the paper. The words were written not in ink, but in a subtle, velvety blackness that stood out against the page. They see a monster. I see a king. The darkness isn't your cage. It's your throne room. And thrones are meant to be taken, not given. Asterisk. Asterisk. A friend in the dark. Asterisk. The message disintegrated into motes of shadow moments after he read it. Izuku stared at the empty space where it had been. Fear spiked, cold and sharp. Someone knew. Someone was out there, in the city's hidden places, who understood this power. And they weren't afraid. They were recruiting. The cliffhanger of his isolation shattered, replaced by a far more dangerous one. He was no longer just a problem for UA to solve. He was a prize for the shadows of the world to claim. Chapter 5. The Whisper in the Corridor. The note was a seed. It took root in the quiet soil of Izuku's isolation and grew into a thorny vine of paranoia. Who had sent it? Another student, a teacher, an outsider who could slip past UA's formidable security with nothing but a wisp of darkness. The fact that someone knew asterisk, that they saw the monarch in him when everyone else saw a threat, was more unsettling than any direct attack. For days, he moved through UA like a ghost. He attended classes, took notes, ate meals in the dorm under the watchful, worried eyes of his friends. Their attempts to include him were gentle, persistent, and felt like 1,000 tiny cuts. Uraraka's cheerful questions about his cool new shadow moves were met with monosyllabic answers. Ida's logical breakdowns of quirk theory felt like they were analyzing a specimen. Todoroki's silent, observant, stares were the worst. They felt like they were slowly etching away his layers, searching for the throne beneath. Bakugo, for his part, had entered a state of cold, simmering silence. He no longer growled insults or made explosive boasts. He just watched Izuku with an intensity that was almost predatory, as if waiting for the mask to slip completely. The private training sessions with Izuku and All Might continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. It was no longer assessment. It was containment. They ran drills designed to exhaust his connection to the shadows, flooding the training vault with even more intense light, forcing him to rely on the dampened, muted flickers of One for All. He complied, but each session felt like being asked to breathe only thin, mountain air when a deep, rich ocean was at his disposal. He was slowly suffocating in the light. It was during one of these soul-draining sessions that the second contact came. He was in the library, a fortress of wood and paper that should have felt safe. He was researching obscure quirk manifestation theories, a futile attempt to find some precedent, some scrap of science that could explain him to his teachers. The words blurred on the page. The quiet rustle of pages and the soft hum of computers were a lullaby to his exhaustion. A presence settled in the chair opposite him. He didn't look up, assuming it was another student. "You're looking in the wrong place." The voice was a murmur, smooth and low, like water over stone. It held no malice, but an intimate familiarity that made the hairs on Izuku's neck stand up. He looked up. The boy sitting across the table was from the General Studies course. Izuku had seen him in passing. Tall, with hair as dark as ink and eyes a pale, startling gray. His name was Hikaru. Something like that. He had a forgettable face, pleasant but unremarkable. Except for his eyes. Right now, they held a depth, a knowing glint that was anything but forgettable. "The answer isn't in a book, Izuku Midoriya," the boy said, flipping idly through a volume on meta abilities. "It's in the silence between breaths. In the shape of the dark when you close your eyes." Izuku's blood ran cold. His grip tightened on the edge of the table. Shadows in the corner of the library, cast by a tall bookshelf, subtly deepened. "What do you want?" "A conversation." The boy smiled, a small, placid thing. "My name is Kaito, and I've been waiting for you. We all have. We, the ones who listen to the quiet parts of the world." Kaito leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping further. "You feel it, don't you? The strain, the hypocrisy. They preach control while fearing what they can't understand. They call you a hero in training, but they cage the very thing that could make you truly great." "They're trying to help me," Izuku said, but the words lacked conviction. "Are they?" Kaito's gray eyes didn't blink. "Or are they trying to prune you back into a shape that fits the garden? The symbol of peace is a sun. Blinding, glorious, destined to burn out. You are the night that follows. Eternal, patient, embracing." He gestured casually, and the shadow of his own pen on the table stretched, twisted, and formed a perfect, tiny rose before melting back. A display of effortless, minor control. A shared secret. Izuku's breath caught. "You have it too." A flicker, a whisper of what you command. Kaito admitted, his smile turning wistful. "Most of us only have a flicker. We're the ones who see better in the dark, who find comfort in corners, who can make a shadow jump for a moment. We're the echoes. You're the source. The first true sovereign in generations." The title landed with the weight of destiny. It felt both absurd and terrifyingly correct. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're lonely," Kaito said simply. "And because the darkness isn't meant to be lonely. It's a connective tissue. It touches everything. There's a whole world you've been invited into, Izuku. A community. People who wouldn't fear you. Who would understand the weight of the crown you never asked for." He slid a small, plain black card across the table. On it was an address in a quieter district of Musutafu, and a time. Tonight, after curfew. "Come, just to see. No obligation. Just listen to the quiet with others who can hear it." He stood up, his chair scraping softly. "They're watching you, of course. Aizawa's rotation of monitors. But the dark has its own paths. If you want to come, you'll find a way." Kaito walked away, fading into the stacks of books. The library felt louder, brighter, more hostile after he left. Izuku stared at the black card. It was a threshold. On one side, the structured, fearful light of UA, of All Might's disappointment, of being a puzzle to be solved. On the other, understanding, belonging, a name for the power that thrummed in his veins. The conflict tore at him all afternoon. During a tedious lesson on modern hero lore, he traced the address on his thigh with a finger, over and over. The urge to go was a physical pull, a hunger for recognition that was deeper than any desire for praise. Curfew fell. The dorms quieted. From his window, he saw Aizawa on a patrol round, a silent wraith against the moonlit campus. This was it, a test, not just of his power, but of his will. Did he obey, and stay the caged, good boy? Or did he embrace the part of him that was no longer just Izuku Midoriya? He made his choice. He didn't open the door. He stood in the middle of his dark room and sank, not through the floor, but into the shadow at his feet. The world dissolved into a rushing, silent river of cool darkness. It was disorienting, a sensation of being everywhere and nowhere at once. He felt the foundations of the building, the pipes, the electrical conduits. He moved with a thought, flowing through the unseen conduits of the dorm's own architecture, a phantom in the walls. He emerged from the long shadow of the UA outer wall, reconstituting on a quiet side street a half-mile from campus. He stumbled, his physical form solidifying, and took a sharp, gasping breath. The journey had been instinctual, a new sense guiding him. He felt a slight drain, a tiny cost for the translocation. But he was out, unseen. The address led to an old, repurposed tea house in a district of artisan shops, all closed for the night. The sign above the door was blank. The windows were dark. It looked abandoned. He approached, his heart a drum in the new, profound quiet of the night. He raised a hand to knock. The door opened before he touched it. Warm, dim light spilled out, from candles, not electric bulbs. The air smelled of incense, old paper, and damp earth. Kaito stood there, his earlier placid smile replaced by one of genuine welcome. "You found the path," he said, stepping aside. "Welcome, Sovereign." Izuku stepped over the threshold. The door closed behind him, sealing out the world of light. Inside, the space was larger than it seemed. The main room was a sunken floor with cushions arranged in a circle. And there were people, maybe 24, all ages, from teenagers to elderly men and women. They were unassuming, dressed in ordinary clothes, but their eyes, all held that same knowing glint, that comfort with the low light. They turned to look at him as one, and they bowed, not deeply, but a clear, respectful inclination of the head. A woman with silver hair and kind eyes stood. "We've felt the shift in the world's quiet," she said, her voice like rustling leaves. "The awakening of the throne. We are the Umbra, the keepers of the twilight. And we have waited long for you to walk among us." Izuku stood frozen, a boy in a uniform surrounded by reverence he didn't deserve. He saw no fear here, no suspicion, only a quiet, patient acceptance that felt like a balm on his raw, lonely soul. "I don't want to rule anything," he whispered, the words echoing in the hushed room. An old man chuckled softly. "The night does not want to fall, young king. It simply does. It is its nature, and yours is unfolding." He gestured to a cushion in the center of the circle. "Sit, rest. You are among those who see you for what you are, not for what they wish you to be." For the first time since the rooftop, Izuku felt the terrible, armoring stillness inside him soften. Just a fraction. He was understood, but as he moved to sit, a cold spike of awareness shot through him. His connection to his shadows, stretched thin by his journey, brushed against something else in the city. Something vast, hungry, and old. Not a flicker, not an echo. A presence. A deep, sleeping malignancy in the underbelly of Musutafu that his new senses could now perceive. It felt like a cancer in the world's shadow. His head snapped up, his eyes wide. The Umbra members followed his gaze, their faces turning solemn. "You feel it," the silver-haired woman said, her kindness edged with grimness. "The corruption. It is why we have waited. The darkness has been sick for a long time. It needs its monarch not just to reign, but to heal it. And to fight what festers in its depths." The belonging, he'd felt twisted into a chilling responsibility. This wasn't just a refuge. It was a council of war, and they were crowning him the general. The warm, candlelit room suddenly felt like the antechamber to a battlefield. The understanding in their eyes wasn't just acceptance. It was expectation. And in the distant, felt darkness of the city, the sleeping malignancy seemed to stir, as if sensing the awakening of its king. Chapter 6. The Taint in the Deep. The warmth of the tea house was an illusion. It couldn't penetrate the cold dread that had settled in Izuku's bones. He sat on the offered cushion, not as a guest finding solace, but as a general receiving his first, horrifying intelligence report. The corruption, the silver-haired woman, she introduced herself as Hannah, explained, her gentle voice now grave. "It is not a person, nor a single quirk. It is a sickness in the fabric of the unseen, a perversion of the very shadows we cherish." An elderly man named Jiro, his hands gnarled like old roots, took up the tale. "For decades, we Umbra have been the world's quiet custodians. We felt the natural dark, its peaceful silence. Then, about 15 years ago, a new taste entered the stillness. A sour, greasy feeling, places where the shadows felt hungry, not with the patient hunger of night, but a vicious, consuming need." Kaito, sitting cross-legged beside Izuku, added softly, "People started disappearing. Not many, the forgotten, the ones who lived in the margins. The authorities blamed ordinary crime, or accidents. But we knew, the corrupted shadows were taking them. Not just their bodies, their light, their essence. Izuku's mind raced, connecting fragments. The thing I felt, when I arrived. It's huge, dormant, but alive. Hana nodded. It slumbers, gathering strength, feeding on fear and misery from the city above. We believe it is coalescing, forming a core, a heart of the corruption. If it awakens fully, she spread her hands, a gesture of utter desolation. It won't be a villain to fight. It will be a blight, a wave of shadow that doesn't embrace, but devours. It will extinguish light, hope, life itself, leaving only a hollow, ravenous dark. Why haven't you stopped it? The question left Izuku's lips before he could stop it. It wasn't an accusation, but a plea for understanding. Jiro's smile was bitter. We are whispers, boy. Flickers. We can sense the storm. But we cannot stop it. Our power is to listen, to watch, to gently guide. It is a shepherd's power. His pale eyes fixed on Izuku, filled with a desperate hope. But you are not a shepherd. You are the storm itself. The true, rightful dark. Only a sovereign can face the corruption. Only a king can reclaim his tainted kingdom. The weight was astronomical. It crushed at the momentary relief of being understood. They didn't just accept him. They were handing him a cosmic-scale catastrophe. How? He breathed. I don't know how to do any of that. You will, Hana said, her certainty absolute. The power knows. Your instincts will guide you. But you must first see it. You must look upon the sickness in your domain. They gave him a location. The abandoned Musutafu Metro Extension Tunnel. A project left to rot years ago. A deep, man-made scar in the earth. The perfect womb for something foul. Izuku left the tea house before dawn, his mind churning. The Umbra's faith was a mantle of lead. He returned to UA the same way he left, flowing through the architectural shadows, a ghost slipping back into its cell. His body reformed in his room, the faint smell of incense clinging to his uniform. He collapsed onto his bed, not sleeping, just staring at the ceiling as it slowly lightened with the approaching day. The next 48 hours were an exercise in agonizing duality. He smiled at Uraraka, nodded at Ida's lectures on procedure, flinched under Aizawa's scrutinizing gaze in training. All while the map of the metro tunnel burned behind his eyes, and the low, sub-auditory hum of the corruption thrummed at the edge of his awareness, a rotten tooth in the mouth of the world. He had to see it. The compulsion was a physical itch. 2 nights later, he stood at the chain-link fence surrounding the metro construction site. Graffiti scarred the warning signs. The entrance was a yawning concrete mouth descending into the earth, sealed by rusted doors that had been pried open long ago. The darkness within didn't just look black. It looked thick, oily. Taking a breath that did nothing to steady him, Izuku stepped forward. He didn't climb the fence. He let his body dissolve into the shadow of the fence post, flowing through the metal links like smoke and reforming on the other side. The act was becoming smoother, less draining. The tunnel entrance exhaled a breath of stale, cold air that carried a scent beneath the dust, coppery, like old blood, and sweetly rotten, like forgotten fruit. He walked in, and the daylight died 3 steps later. Absolute blackness swallowed him, but he could see. To his new senses, the tunnel was not empty. It was a landscape. The concrete walls bled a faint, residual gray light of old memories, fear from workers, frustration, ambition. But snaking through that, like vile veins, were strands of deep, pulsating purple-black. The corruption. It clung to the walls, the ceiling, pulling on the floor in sticky-looking patches. It felt angry, hungry. It whispered in a language of gnawing emptiness and spite. He followed the veins deeper, his feet making no sound. The tunnel branched, and he took the path where the taint was thickest. The air grew colder. The whispers grew louder, not in his ears, but in his soul, needling at the edges of his stillness. Alone, always alone, they fear you, Hay will cast you out. Join us, be empty, be full. He shook his head, pushing the invasive thoughts back with a wall of royal silence. The shadows that naturally existed here, the pure, neutral dark, shied away from the corrupted veins. Pressing close to Izuku as if for protection. He was a bastion in the blight. He turned a final corner and stopped. The tunnel opened into a wider service cavern. And in the center, growing from the floor like a monstrous, pulsing fungus, was a mass of the corruption. It was a knot of twisting, thorn-like tendrils of deep violet and obsidian, surrounding a Re that rhythmically dimmed and glowed with a sick, internal light. It was the size of a car. Around its base, scattered like broken shells, were shapes. Not bodies, empty husks of clothing, wallets, personal effects. The leftovers of the consumed. This was the heart, the seed of the blight Hannah described. Revulsion, hot and human, boiled up in Izuku. This was wrong. This was a violation of the very concept he was beginning to embody. The darkness was meant to be peaceful, a blanket, a rest. Not this ravenous, hateful thing. As if sensing his presence, the core's glow intensified. The thorny tendrils uncoiled, lifting like the heads of serpents. The psychic whispers became a scream. Asterisk interloper. Pretender, the darkness is pain, the darkness is hunger, asterisk. A tendril, moving faster than sight, lashed out at him. It wasn't a physical whip. It was a spear of pure, corrosive malice. Izuku reacted without thought. A wall of solid shadow erupted from the ground before him, summoned from the pure dark of the cavern. The purple tendril struck it with a sound like sizzling acid. His shadow wall held, but he felt the impact in his soul, a jolt of cold, draining despair. The corruption wasn't just attacking his body. It was trying to poison his power, his will. More tendrils struck. Izuku danced back, commanding the shadows around him. They rose as soldiers, not the defined ones from his arsenal, but crude, immediate constructs of the local darkness. They threw themselves at the tendrils, grappling, holding them back. But where they touched the corruption, they began to smoke, to dissolve, infected by the contact. He felt each loss like a small, cold burn. He couldn't fight this here. Not like this. He didn't understand its nature. He was a king facing a rebel plague in the heart of his own territory. And the plague was winning. A thick, primary tendril, thicker than his torso, smashed through his shadow guards and slammed into the ground where he'd stood a millisecond before. The concrete didn't crack. It dissolved asterisk, eaten away into nothingness. Asterisk your throne is a lie. There is only the feast. Join the feast, asterisk. The voice was inside him now, clawing at the stillness. Images flashed behind his eyes, All Might turning away in disgust, his mother weeping over a shadow that wore his face, his own hands, black and clawed, reaching for his friends. No, the word was quiet. It was not a shout, but a decree. The stillness within Izuku solidified from a calm sea into glacial ice. The invasive whispers hit it and shattered. The shadows in the cavern, even the ones corrupted, flinched as one. For a moment, the pulsing heart of the corruption hesitated. In that moment, Izuku didn't attack. He reached out, not with a weapon, but with his sovereignty. He pushed his will, the essence of the true, rightful dark, into the corrupted mass. He didn't try to destroy it. He tried to understand it, to claim it. The reaction was instant and volcanic. The corruption recoiled as if scalded, its scream becoming one of pure, unadulterated rage and fear. It recognized him, not as an enemy, but as its antithesis, its rightful ruler. It couldn't be claimed, not yet. It was too strong, too entrenched in its own vile identity. But he had touched it, and it had felt him. The entire mass of tendrils contracted, wrapping protectively around the glowing core. The light within pulsed once, blindingly bright, and then the corruption did something he didn't expect. It retreated. It didn't fade. It flowed asterisk, the entire monstrous mass seeping down into a crack in the cavern floor. Vanishing into the deeper earth, leaving only the scorched, dissolved ground and the hollow, empty belongings. The cavern was silent. The pure shadows timidly returned to their places. Izuku stood alone, breathing hard, not from exertion, but from the psychic battle. His hands were trembling. He had faced the sickness in his kingdom, and he had survived. He had even made it flee. But he hadn't won. He had merely revealed himself. And as he felt the last echo of the corruption's presence fade into the deeper, unmapped tunnels beneath the city, he knew with chilling certainty. It was afraid of him. And something that vast, that evil, that afraid, would not run forever. It would find a way to fight back. Chapter 7. The Fractured Reflection. The silence of the CA. Vern after the corruption's retreat was a physical weight. Izuku stood in the hollowed-out space, the scent of ozone and rot clinging to the air. His own shadows, loyal and shaken, pressed close like nervous animals. The stillness inside him, which had turned glacial to repel the invasion, now felt brittle. A pane of ice over a deep, dark well of exhaustion. He had touched it. He had felt its hatred, its infinite, hungry loneliness. And it had felt him. The walk back through the tunnels was a blur. The corrupted veins had lost their sickly glow, now just inert stains on the concrete. The blight was gone from this place, but the memory of its presence was a stain on his soul. He emerged into the night sky, the clean air a shock to his system. The normal sounds of the distant city felt obscenely cheerful. He returned to UA. Not with the stealth of a phantom, but with the heavy tread of a soldier from a lost war. He slipped back into his room just as the first pale light of dawn touched the horizon. He didn't bother changing. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his hands. They were clean, unmarked. They had commanded shadows to fight a conceptual evil, and they hadn't even trembled during the act. Now, they trembled. Sleep was impossible. When the morning alarm blared, it was a mercy. The routine of preparation for class was an anchor in a sea of formless dread. He splashed water on his face, the cold doing nothing to clear the lingering echo of the corruption's psychic scream. The common area was its usual bustle. Kirishima was loudly proclaiming the manliness of a good breakfast. Kaminari was trying and failing to flirt with Jiro, who electrocuted his toast with a bored flick of her earphone jack. It was normal. It was a world away. Uraraka spotted him, her smile bright. "Morning, Deku. You look really tired. Everything okay?" He manufactured a weak smile. "Just stayed up late studying." "For what?" "Izuku's pop quiz on underground hero ethics." She groaned. "I'm doomed." Her easy camaraderie was a lifeline he couldn't afford to grasp. If she knew where he'd been, what he'd faced, he gave a non-committal hum and focused on getting toast. It was in heroics class that the fracture became visible. They were in Gym Gamma, the one that could be reconfigured at will. Today's exercise was simple paired spars, focusing on maneuverability and terrain use. The floor shifted, creating a landscape of platforms, pillars, and pitfalls. "Midoriya, Todoroki, you're up first," Izuku announced, his eyes lingering on Izuku with that familiar, searching suspicion. Izuku's stomach dropped. Shoto Todoroki was the last person he wanted to face. His analytical coldness, his own immense, dual-natured power, he would see through any pretense. They took air positions on opposite ends of a shifting, rocky ravine. Todoroki's expression was unreadable, but his mismatched eyes were sharp. "Begin." Todoroki moved without hesitation. A glacier of ice erupted from his right foot. A tidal wave of frozen spikes surging across the arena, aiming to pin Izuku instantly. It was a classic, overwhelming Todoroki opener. Instinct took over. The old Izuku would have flickered with green lightning, shattered the ice with a Detroit smash, damaging himself in the process. The new Izuku didn't move. A wall of pure blackness, smooth as polished obsidian, rose from the floor directly in front of him. It wasn't summoned from elsewhere, it was the very shadow of the incoming ice wave, given substance and command. The glacier crashed into it, and stopped. The ice shattered against the immovable dark, fracturing into a million glittering shards that rained down harmlessly. A collective gasp echoed in the gym. The wall dissolved into smoke. Todoroki didn't pause. He stomped again, but this time sent a wave of fire from his left side, roaring around the side of the ravine to engulf Izuku from the flank. Izuku simply stepped sideways, into the long shadow cast by a towering pillar. He vanished. The fire washed over empty space. He reappeared 3 pillars away, stepping out of another shadow as casually as walking through a door. Todoroki's eyes narrowed. He was adapting, thinking. He created a localized blizzard, throwing up a whirlwind of ice and snow to obscure vision and limit shadow creation. It was a smart tactic. Against anyone else, it would have worked. Izuku closed his eyes. He didn't need light to see. He felt the terrain through the darkness that persisted within the blizzard, in the micro shadows between snowflakes, in the hollows of the ice itself. He felt Todoroki's thermal shape, a beacon of cold and heat. A tendril of shadow, thin as wire, shot from the gloom at Todoroki's feet, aiming to wrap around his ankle. Todoroki sensed it, leaping back and flash freezing the ground where it emerged. But it was a feint. While Todoroki was airborne, another shadow, formed from the darkness under his own billowing fire, solidified into a flat platform beneath him. It wasn't an attack. It was a stage. Todoroki landed on it, off balance for a split second. In that second, Izuku was there. He hadn't run. He'd flowed through the network of shadows like water through pipes. He stood before Todoroki, his hand outstretched, not to strike, but resting lightly on Todoroki's chest. A single, controlled pulse of black energy, a monarch's gentle touch. Not a warrior's blow. Todoroki froze, his breath catching. He felt it, a nullifying chill, a momentary disconnect from his quirk. As if the very potential for fire and ice within him had been politely asked to be silent. Izuku stepped back, dissolving the shadow platform. The blizzard died. The gym was utterly silent. Match. Aizawa called, his voice devoid of inflection. Midoriya. Izuku turned and walked back to the sidelines. He hadn't used one for all. He hadn't thrown a single punch. He had one with a terrifying, elegant economy that felt less like a fight and more like a demonstration of natural law. The looks from his classmates were no longer of awe or curiosity. They were of dawning alarm. Bakugo's face was a rigid mask of fury, his hands smoking at his sides. Uraraka's smile was gone, replaced by wide-eyed confusion. Ida was adjusting his glasses, his mind visibly whirring to categorize something uncategorizable. It was Todoroki, walking back to his side, who spoke. His voice was low, for Izuku's ears only. That wasn't control, Midoriya. His heterochromatic eyes held not anger, but a profound, disquieted certainty. That was dominion. You didn't fight me on the battlefield. You changed the rules of the game. He paused, his gaze dropping to Izuku's shadow, which lay a little too solidly on the floor. What are you becoming? The question hung in the air, unanswered. The rest of the sparring matches passed in a blur. Izuku sat apart, feeling the chasm widen with every glance thrown his way. He was an island in a sea of light, and the waters were growing stormy. After class, as everyone filed out to change, the confrontation he'd been dreading finally ignited. He was at his locker, head down, when a heavy hand slammed the metal door shut next to his head. Look at me, you fucking shadow-casting creep. Bakugo. His voice was a low, venomous growl, all pretense of his earlier cold silence gone. His crimson eyes burned with a hatred that was new. It wasn't the old, frustrated scorn for a weakling. This was the hatred one reserves for a profound betrayal. Izuku turned slowly. Kaken. Don't. Bakugo spat the word. You don't get to call me that. Not anymore. The Deku I knew is gone. That worthless shit who broke his bones trying to be a hero. He's dead. And this thing that's wearing his face. He gestured violently at Izuku. What the hell is it? Some villain quirk you finally unlocked. Some side effect of All Might's power going rotten. It's not rotten, Izuku said, his own voice quiet but firm. The stillness inside him rose. A cold defense against Bakugo's heat. The fuck it isn't. Bakugo roared, drawing the attention of the few remaining students in the hallway. You don't fight. You don't struggle. You just declare you win. That's not heroics. That's tyranny. You're acting like the goddamn king of the world. Maybe the world needs a different kind of hero, Izuku heard himself say. The words coming from that deep, quiet place. Bakugo's expression contorted into something ugly. A hero. You think that's what you are? I saw your eyes when you fought icy hot. Empty. Like you were ordering dinner. Not fighting a rival. You felt nothing. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a seething whisper. A real hero feels. They rage, they hurt, they bleed, they care until it burns them up. You're just cold. You're not the successor. You're a goddamn imposter. The words were designed to wound, to provoke the old Izuku into a stammering, emotional reaction. The new Izuku just looked at him. The shadows in the hallway, cast by the lockers, subtly lengthened, stretching towards Bakugo's feet like curious tendrils. You're afraid, Kaken, Izuku said, and the truth of it was a revelation. You're not afraid I'll beat you. You're afraid you can't even understand what you're fighting anymore. The rules you built your whole life on, they don't apply to me. And that terrifies you. For a split second, Bakugo's fury wavered, revealing the raw, bewildered fear beneath. It was there, in the slight widening of his eyes, the minute tremble in his clenched jaw. He saw it. Izuku saw him see it. That was the final straw. With a wordless roar of pure rage, Bakugo swung. Not a controlled, explosive punch, but a wild, haymaker fueled by humiliation and terror. Izuku didn't block it. He didn't need to. The shadow at Bakugo's feet erupted upward, forming a cocoon of darkness around the fist an inch from Izuku's face. It held it, immobile. Bakugo strained, explosions popping harmlessly against the absorbing blackness, his arm trapped in a vice of void. They stood frozen in the hallway tableau, Bakugo, immobilized, panting with rage. Izuku, calm, untouched. His green eyes meeting Bakugo's crimson ones with a pity that was worse than any hatred. The other students stared, stunned. Izuku released the shadow. It sank back into the floor. Bakugo stumbled back, clutching his arm as if burned by cold. "Stay away from me, Bakugo," Izuku said, using the surname like a weapon. He turned, picked up his bag, and walked down the hall. The other NTS parted for him like he was carrying a plague. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel Bakugo's shattered pride, his boiling, impotent fury, and the chilling new fear that had just been born in his oldest rival's heart. He had won the confrontation. He had proven his power's absolute superiority in a way that was undeniable. So why did the victory taste like ashes, and why did the stillness inside him feel so much like loneliness? He had fractured his oldest mirror, and in the jagged pieces, he didn't see a hero smiling back. He saw a sovereign, standing alone in a throne room of his own making, and the throne, for the first time, looked terribly, terribly cold. Chapter 8. The Council of Light and Shadow. The fallout from the locker confrontation was a quiet tremor that shook the foundations of Class 1A. Bakugo, for once, was eerily silent. He didn't explode, didn't rant. He just seethed, a pressure cooker with a locked valve, his interactions reduced to grunts and glares that held a new, calculating venom. The others gave Izuku a wide berth. The friendly claps on the back, the shared lunches, the easy jokes, they evaporated. He was no longer just the kid with the scary quirk evolution. He was the kid who had frozen their strongest, angriest classmate with a thought, and looked bored doing it. The isolation was a paradox. In the Umbra's tea house, he was a king awaited. In the halls of UA, he was a ghost haunting his own life. The summons came not from Izuku, but directly from the principal. The message was terse, delivered by a drone that hovered outside his dorm window at dawn. Principal Nezu requests your presence in conference room A0700 hours. Please come alone. Alone. The word held a universe of meaning. The walk to the main building felt longer than the trek through the metro tunnels. The morning sun was bright, mocking. He entered the sterile, modern quiet of conference room A. The table was long, polished to a mirror shine. Seated around it were the people who held his future in their hands. All Might, in his true form, sat stiffly, his face gaunt and grim. Izuku stood by the window, arms crossed, a dark silhouette against the light. Nezu perched at the head of the table on a specially tall chair, a cup of tea steaming before him. And to Izuku's shock, there were two others. On All Might's side, dressed in a crisp suit, was a man with sharp features and an air of official gravity, a representative from the Hero Public Safety Commission. And on the other side, in simple, dark robes, was Hana, the silver-haired elder of the Umbra. The worlds had collided, the light and the shadow, meeting to discuss him. Please sit, Midoriya-kun, Nezu chirped, his cheerfulness a brittle veneer over the room's tension. Izuku took the empty seat at the opposite end of the table, feeling like a defendant. He nodded slightly to Hana. Her gaze was serene, but her eyes held a warning. We'll dispense with pleasantries, the commission man began. His voice clipped. Midoriya Izuku, your recent display of power, while impressive, has raised significant concerns. The nature of this shadow manipulation is unprecedented and, according to our preliminary analysis by quirk specialists, operates on principles that defy standard emitter-type categorization. It shows properties of energy absorption, matter creation, and spatial manipulation. It is, in essence, a power of near-limitless potential for both creation and absolute subjugation. He tapped a tablet, and holographic screens flickered to life above the table, showing footage, Izuku's flawless run through the ceramic course, his spar with Todoroki, even a grainy, enhanced still from a traffic camera near the convenience store robbery, showing his shadow soldiers. Furthermore, we have confirmed incidents of quirk erasure linked to your activities. A serious, permanent alteration of a citizen's meta ability without due process. All Might winced, his hands clenched on the table. Young Midoriya was acting to protect. The intent is irrelevant. The man cut him off. The precedent is catastrophic. If this power becomes widely known, it will cause panic. The public's trust in heroes is built on the stability of quirks as an intrinsic part of a person. You have demonstrated the ability to strip that away. He has also demonstrated the ability to stop crimes without violence, to heal his own injuries, and to move with a precision that could revolutionize rescue work, Hannah's calm voice interjected. She didn't raise her voice, but it filled the space. You focus on the potential for subjugation. We see the potential for guardianship. The darkness is not evil. It is a natural state. He is its natural sovereign. The commission man fixed her with a cold stare. And who, precisely? We. We are the Umbra, observers of the twilight. We have watched the balance of this world for generations. And we have watched a sickness in the unseen places. A corruption that feeds on fear and despair. A blight that your light cannot perceive, let alone combat. She turned her gentle, ancient eyes to Nezu. He has already faced it. In the deep tunnels. And he made it retreat. All heads swiveled to Izuku. Aizawa's capture weapon tensed. You went out. After curfew. After being expressly confined. The truth was the only shield left. I had to see, Izuku said. Meeting Aizawa's gaze. They told me about it. I felt it calling. It's a wrongness. It's eating the shadows. Eating people. It's real, and it's growing. Nezu steepled his paws. This corruption. Describe it. Izuku did. The oily veins, the pulsing heart of malice, the psychic assault, the hollowed-out victims. He spoke of the cold hunger, the way it tried to turn his own power against him. He left out nothing, save for the depth of the Umbra's beliefs about his sovereignty. When he finished, the room was colder. The commission man looked skeptical. All Might looked horrified. Aizawa looked convinced, and that was worse. A threat that exists outside the normal spectrum of hero engagement, Nezu mused. One that, if your account is accurate, on Midoriya-kun is equipped to perceive and counter. This presents a unique dilemma. The dilemma is one of control, the commission man stated. We cannot have a student, no matter how gifted, acting as a lone agent against an unverified, metaphysical threat. The potential for collateral damage, for misjudgment, is too high. Then leash him, Aizawa said bluntly, his red eyes locking onto Izuku. Full-time supervision. No independent action. He trains only under our direct observation until we deem the risk manageable. You would pen the only hound that can smell this particular fox? Hannah asked, her serenity finally cracking with a hint of steel. The corruption felt him. It fears him. It will not wait for your committees and training schedules. It will grow, or it will strike. Would you have him fight it with one hand tied behind his back, a razorhead? Would you have him die politely within your rules? The air crackled with the clash of ideologies. The Commission's rigid order, UA's protective custody, the Umbra's desperate, mystical urgency. It was All Might who broke the stalemate. He had been silent for so long, his great frame seeming to shrink. When he spoke, his voice was hollow, stripped of its heroic resonance. I gave him my power, he said, staring at his own skeletal hands. I gave him one for all so he could become a symbol who saves everyone with a smile. A beacon. He lifted his head, his blue eyes piercing Izuku. What is smiling from the shadows, my boy? What do you save when you leave empty shells behind? This power you now wield. It does not smile. It commands. It does not inspire hope. It inspires awe and fear. The disappointment in his mentor's eyes was a physical weight, crushing the stillness inside Izuku. I am trying to save people, Izuku whispered, his voice raw. But at what cost to yourself? All Might pleaded. This throne they speak of, can you sit on it and still be the Izuku Midoriya who rushed to save a bully without a second thought? Or will the crown change you into something colder? It was the question he had been asking himself in the dark of his room. Nezu took a long sip of tea, the click of the cup the loudest sound in the room. We are at an impasse. The Commission demands oversight. The Umbra demands action. UA is responsible for the safety of its student and the public. He set the cup down. Therefore, I propose a trial. A controlled engagement. Everyone leaned forward. We will verify the existence and threat level of this corruption. Our senses can be calibrated to seek the no malice energy signatures Midoriya describes. If it is confirmed, we will plan a coordinated operation. Midoriya will be the spearhead, the only one who can directly engage the entity. But he will not be alone. A team of UA students and pros, chosen for the complementary abilities and discretion, will form the perimeter. Containment, support, extraction if needed. He looked at each of them in turn. This serves all purposes. The Commission gets oversight and data. The Umbra gets action against their blight. UA fulfills its duty to train and protect. And Midoriya, Nezu's black eyes settled on him. You get to prove that this sovereign can be a hero. That the king can serve his people, not just rule them. It was a gamble. A terrifying, public test of everything he was becoming. The Commission man frowned, but gave a curt nod. Acceptable, but the team selection and operation plan are subject to our approval. Hana bowed her head. The Umbra will provide what guidance we can on its nature. All might look defeated, but acquiescent. Izuku just nodded, his face unreadable. The meeting broke. As Izuku stood to leave, Hana approached him. She placed a light, papery hand on his arm. They will send soldiers with you, but you will walk the deepest dark alone, my king, she whispered, her voice for him alone. Remember the stillness. It is your strength. And remember, the throne is not a seat of luxury. It is a seat of responsibility. Often, a lonely one. She left, flowing from the room as quietly as a receding shadow. Izuku was the last to leave. He stood in the empty, sunlit conference room, the ghosts of the argument still echoing. He had been assessed, debated, and turned into a tactical asset in a war no one else could see. He had avoided being caged, only to be placed on a chessboard. He looked out the window at the bustling, bright campus below. Students laughed, trained, dreamed of being heroes in the spotlight. He was going to lead a team into the deepest dark to fight a nightmare. And he had to prove to All Might, to himself, that the boy who wanted to save everyone could still exist while wearing a crown of shadows. The trial was set. The path was chosen. Now, he had to prepare for a battle where the greatest enemy might not be the corruption, but the fear in the eyes of the comrades fighting beside him. Chapter 9. The Chosen Few. The announcement was made in the stark, bright light of ground beater's observation deck 2 days later. Izuku stood at the front of the assembled class, feeling the weight of the collective gaze like a physical pressure. Izuku, All Might, and Nezu were present, their expressions uniformly grave. A covert, high-priority operation has been identified, Izuku began, his voice cutting through the nervous chatter. Details are classified. What you need to know is this: it involves an anomalous entity with properties that make conventional engagement ineffective. Midoriya possesses a unique capability to counter it. A ripple of unease went through the class. Eyes flicked to Izuku, then away. For this mission, a specialized team will be assembled from Class 1A, Nezu continued, perched on All Might's shoulder. Selection is based on quirk synergy, tactical flexibility, and discretion. The following students will report for intensive briefing and preparation: Yayorozu Momo, Jiro Kyoka, Tokiyami Fumikage, Kirishima Eijiro. The named students blinked in surprise. Yayorozu straightened, her face settling into a mask of focused determination. Jiro's eyebrows rose, but she gave a slow nod, her earphone jacks twitching thoughtfully. Tokiyami's head tilted, a flicker of something, understanding, in his red eyes. Kirishima pumped a hardened fist, his sharp-toothed grin appearing. Hell yeah, we'll get it done, sir. Izuku's mind raced, analyzing Nezu's choices. Yayorozu, creation and leadership. Jiro, sonic reconnaissance, can see in the dark. Tokiyami, dark shadow, a being of literal darkness, the closest thing to a familiar they have. Kirishima, unbreakable defense, unwavering spirit. It was a perfect support team, not to fight the corruption directly, but to create the space for him to do so. To hold the line. He saw the hurt flash in Uraraka's eyes, the frustrated adjustment of Ida's glasses. They were being left behind. Bakugo's face was stone, but the simmer in his eyes said everything. He, the strongest in raw power, had been passed over for the Shadow Wielder's mission. The rest of you will continue standard curriculum under the supervision of other instructors, Izuku said, his tone brooking no argument. Dismissed. The chosen few lingered as the others filed out, a mix of excitement and trepidation in the air. Uraraka paused by Izuku, her smile strained but brave. Be careful, Deku. Save the day, okay. He nodded, words failing him. Ida gave him a stiff, formal bow. Execute your duty with precision. Then they were gone, and it was just the team and the teachers in the echoing space. The briefing that followed was held in a secure, windowless room deep within UA. Holographic maps of the metro tunnel system glowed in the air. Hana was present, her presence a quiet anomaly among the heroes. The entity is a concentration of malignant energy we're calling the corruption, Izuku explained, pointing to the cavern Izuku had described. It feeds on negative emotion and biological essence, leaving husks. It can manipulate the environment and launch psychic attacks. Conventional energy and physical assaults are partially absorbed or ineffective. Midoriya's power interacts with it on a fundamental level. So with a wall, Kirishima said, cracking his hardened knuckles. We keep the nasty side effects off Midoriya while he does his thing. Manly. Precisely, Nezu said. Yaoyorozu, you will be team leader for the support unit. Your task is adaptability. Create tools for navigation, defense against psychic intrusion based on the schematics we'll provide, and barriers to contain any spillover. Jiro, you are our ears. The corruption may have a sound signature or may attempt to disorient with noise. Map the tunnels, listen for its movements. Tokiyami, your dark shadow may be affected. You must maintain absolute control. It could be a vulnerability, or, if you master it, an asset. Kirishima, you are the front line. Anything physical that gets past Midoriya's engagement, you stop. It was a good plan. A sane plan. Izuku felt a flicker of relief. He wouldn't be alone in the dark. Then Hana spoke. You must understand. It is not a beast to be cornered. It is a sickness in a place. It will try to turn you against each other. It will whisper your deepest fears. The silence young Midoriya possesses is his defense. You. She looked at each of them. You must find your own light to hold on to. A memory. A promise. Something unshakably you. Cling to it, or the dark will find the cracks in your soul and pour in. The room grew solemn. This wasn't just a fight. It was a spiritual siege. The following days were a blur of specialized training. They worked in a simulated version of the tunnels constructed in one of UA's secure facilities. Yaoyorozu practiced creating complex objects in near-total darkness, guided by Jiro's sonic pulses. Jiro trained to filter out chaotic noise and pinpoint specific, subtle vibrations. Kirishima drilled on holding position against non-physical, draining attacks simulated by Midnight's somnambulist gas and psychic pressure emitters. Tokiyami's training was the most intense. He and Dark Shadow meditated in a pitch-black room, Izuku standing by with a razor ready. Your bond is your strength, Izuku intoned. But in the presence of a true sovereign of darkness, Dark Shadow may become agitated. You must be the master, not the vessel. Izuku trained separately with all might, but the focus had shifted. No more containment drills. Now, it was about channeling. About using the shadows not just as tools or shields, but as surgical instruments. He practiced extracting the flavor of a target's energy, a simulated quirk signature from a dummy, without consuming it entirely. He practiced creating localized zones of absolute silence to nullify sound-based attacks. He was honing the Monarch's touch into a surgeon's scalpel. Yet, during joint exercises, a new dynamic emerged. The team was professional, effective, but a distance remained. Yaoyorozu was polite, but her orders to him were precise, formal. Jiro was watchful, her eyes often lingering. On him with a musician's analytical curiosity. Kirishima was friendly, but his usual boisterousness was tempered, as if unsure how to act around the quiet, intense Midoriya who had so thoroughly cowed Bakugo. It was Tokiyami who bridged the gap. One evening, after a grueling session, Izuku found himself on one of UA's many secluded balconies, staring at the emerging stars. The door slid open, and Tokiyami stepped out. Dark shadow coiling quietly around his shoulders. The encroaching night offers little solace when one carries it within, does it not? Tokiyami said, his voice a low rumble. Izuku looked at him. You understand. In a way, Dark Shadow is a part of me, yet separate. A power with its own will, its own hunger. It is a constant conversation, a negotiation between my soul and the darkness I host. Tokiyami's red eyes met his. But you are not hosting a guest, Midoriya. You are becoming the house itself. The walls, the foundation. The darkness does not reside in you. It is you. I sense the difference. It is vast. Does it frighten you? The question was out before Izuku could stop it. Dark Shadow hissed softly. Tokiyami was silent for a long moment. It frightens Dark Shadow. It feels like looking into a deep well and seeing its own reflection, but older, calmer, and infinitely more powerful. It wants to both bow and flee. He placed a hand on the flickering manifestation, calming it. As for me, I am cautious. But I have seen your heart, even shrouded as it is now. The boy who rushed to save me at the summer camp has not vanished. He is merely standing in a deeper shadow than any of us knew existed. The simple faith, coming from the most gothic and solemn member of the class, was a balm. Thank you, Tokiyami. Call me Fumikage. We are to venture into the abyss together. Formality is a shield too brittle for such a place. It was the first crack in the wall of isolation. The first acknowledgement from one of his chosen comrades that he was still Izuku Midoriya, even now. The night before the operation, they gathered for a final briefing. The mood was taut. Gear was checked and rechecked. Yaoyorozu had created special comms units resistant to psychic interference, and insulated suits with layers designed to mitigate energy drain. They looked less like heroes and more like deep-sea explorers, or astronauts venturing into a void. All Might pulled Izuku aside. He looked older than ever. My boy, he said, his voice thick. I cannot guide you in this. I am a creature of the sun. All I can do is trust. Trust that the heart I saw in you is still the compass. He placed a heavy hand on Izuku's shoulder. Come back, not just as a king. Come back as my student. It was a plea, not an order. Izuku nodded, a lump in his throat. I will. At 2,300 hours. A nondescript transport vehicle left UA. Izuku sat between Kirishima and Tokiyami, watching the city lights blur past. No one spoke. Jiro had her eyes closed, listening to the rhythm of the engine. Yaoyorozu was reviewing schematics on a tablet, her jaw set. They arrived at a covert entrance to the tunnel system, far from the main site Izuku had used. The air was cold and still. As they geared up, pulling on helmets with built-in sonar and low-light displays fed by Jiro's quirk, Aizawa gave them one last look. Your mission is support and containment. Do not engage the core. That is Midoriya's task. If he falls, your orders are to retreat immediately. Understood. Yes, sir. 4 voices, united in determination. They descended into the earth. The world of light vanished, replaced by the green and black ghost images of Jiro's sonic mapping on their visors. The silence was profound, broken only by their breathing and the soft scuff of boots. They moved in formation, Kirishima in front, already hardened, a red shield in the gloom. Yaoyorozu and Jiro in the center, one creating, one listening. Tokiyami and Izuku took the rear, Dark Shadow extended as a living sensor ahead of them. They reached the junction leading to the cavern. The air changed. It grew colder, sharper. The sonic map on the displays began to fuzz with static. A low, subaudible thrum vibrated through the rock. I'm getting interference, Jiro reported, her voice tight in their earpieces. Like a heartbeat. A big, slow, nasty one. It knows we're here, Izuku said softly. As they turned the final corner, the cavern opened before them. It was as Izuku remembered, yet worse. The pulsing heart of corruption was larger, the thorny tendrils more numerous, writhing slowly in the still air. The hollowed belongings were gone, absorbed. The veins on the walls throbbed with a sick purple light. Asterisk you return. Pretender king, and you bring snacks, asterisk. The voice was in all their heads this time. Kirishima grunted, shaking his head. Yaoyorozu gasped. Jiro winced, her hands flying to her temples. Hold your focus, Yaoyorozu commanded, her voice shaking but clear. Remember your anchors. Izuku stepped forward, past Kirishima. The shadows in the cavern trembled, then streamed towards him, forming a cloak of living night around his armor. His eyes glowed with faint, emerald light. This ends now, he said, not to the corruption, but to his team. A statement of intent, a promise. The core pulsed violently. Asterisk the feast begins. Asterisk. Dozens of thorny tendrils, moving with terrifying speed. shot from the mass, not just at Izuku, but spearing towards each member of the team. The battle for the deep dark had begun, and the chosen few stood at the precipice. Their lights about to be tested against the all-consuming hunger of the void. Chapter 10. The Siege of Shadows. The world dissolved into a storm of lashing darkness. Thorn tendrils, moving with the speed of striking cobras, filled the cavern. The air itself seemed to thicken with malice, a psychic pressure that pressed down like a physical weight. Positions. Yaoyorozu's voice sliced through the mental fog, sharp with command. Kirishima was already moving. I'm on it. He lunged forward, not to attack the tendrils aiming for Izuku, but to intercept the ones targeting his teammates. His hardened body slammed into two of them, a ringing clang echoing through the cavern as the corrupted shadows recoiled from his unyielding form. They coiled around his arms, their edges sizzling against his quirk. Trying to find a weakness, a crack in his spirit. Not manly at all. He grunted, holding his ground. Two tendrils shot for Jiro. She didn't flinch. She stomped a foot, sending a concentrated pulse of sound directly into the cavern floor. The sonic wave disrupted the matter of the tendrils, causing them to shiver and fray at the tips, buying her a second. In that second, Yaoyorozu's hand flashed from behind her. A small, disc-shaped device flying through the air. It attached to the wall and emitted a high-frequency whine, a sonic fence that made the tendrils writhe back, repelled by the discordant vibration. Izuku stood at the center of it all, a still point in the chaos. The tendrils meant for him met a wall of his own making. His summoned shadows rose from the ground, not as soldiers this time, but as a shifting, reactive shield. They intercepted, parried, and absorbed the blows. Where a corrupted thorn pierced one of his shadows, he felt it, a jolt of icy poison, a whisper of despair. You are alone, they will fail, you will watch them die. He gritted his teeth, severing the corrupted piece from the main shadow, letting it dissolve into harmless smoke. The cost was minimal. He was the source. The shadows were expendable, but his friends were not. Isolate the king, consume the light, The corruption's core pulsed again. The strategy shifted. Instead of direct attacks, the tendrils began to weave a cage of interlocking thorns around Izuku, trying to wall him off from the others. At the same time, the floor near Kirishima and Yaoyorozu began to bubble and churn. Pools of inky blackness forming, from which smaller, faster shades, echoes of the consumed victims, began to claw their way out. Mindless, shrieking things, driven by a hunger they could no longer understand. Fumikage. Now, Yaoyorozu ordered. Tokiyami, who had been standing with eyes closed, deep in meditation, opened them. Revelry in the dark, he intoned. Dark shadow. His living quirk erupted, not in its usual chaotic, aggressive form, but focused, controlled. It flowed like a torrent of liquid gold-tinged black, a river of protective darkness. It didn't attack the cage around Izuku. It wrapped around the emerging shades, containing them in a whirlwind of claws and feathers. They are empty, Tokiyami called, strain in his voice as he wrestled with the alien hunger of the shades. There is no soul to save, only hunger to quell. Understood. Yaoyorozu's hands glowed. She created not weapons, but canisters. They rolled towards Dark Shadow's containment field and erupted, not with explosion, but with a burst of concentrated, blinding white light, flash grenades of her own design. The shades screamed, a sound of pure agony, and dissolved under the combined salt of light and Dark Shadow's righteous fury. But the cage around Izuku was nearly complete. He could see his teammates through the web of thorns, fighting their own battles. Kirishima was a red rock in a sea of grasping tendrils. Jiro was bleeding from a cut on her forehead, her sonic pulses growing more frantic. Yaoyorozu's creations were coming slower, her energy being drained by the relentless psychic assault. They were holding, but they were being worn down. The corruption had infinite patience. It could wait for their lights to flicker and die. Izuku knew then that Aizawa's plan was wrong. He wasn't a spearhead to be protected. That was thinking like a soldier of the light. He was the king, and a king's place was not behind walls, but at the front, reshaping the battlefield. He stopped defending. He dropped his shields. The tendrils surged inward, thorns poised to impale him. Yes, except the end. Izuku closed his eyes. He didn't reach for the shadows around him. He reached for the stillness within the corruption itself. The sickness was a perversion, but it was still, at its core, a form of darkness. And all darkness, he realized with a sudden, tranquil certainty, belonged to the sovereign. He didn't attack. He issued a decree. You are of the dark. I am the dark. Be still. Asterisk. The command rang out not as a shout, but as the tolling of a deep, silent bell. It resonated through the cavern, through the tendrils, through the very core of the corruption. The lashing thorns froze in midair, inches from his skin. The shrieking shades in dark shadow's grip fell silent. The pools of inky blackness stopped bubbling. For a single, suspended second, the entire cavern held its breath. The corruption's core pulsed in frantic, panicked rhythm. Asterisk no, you see. ANNOT. This is mine, my hunger, my pain, asterisk. It was never yours, Izuku thought, the words calm and absolute. It was a kingdom waiting for its king. And your reign of hunger is over. Asterisk. He took a step forward. The frozen tendrils parted before him like a parting sea, disintegrating into motes of harmless gray ash as his sovereignty passed over them. He walked through the dissolving cage towards the pulsing heart. His team stared. Their fights abruptly ended. Kirishima lowered his hardened arms, panting. Jiro leaned against the wall, eyes wide behind her visor. Yaoyorozu watched, a hand over her mouth. Tokiyami recalled Dark Shadow, the entity shrinking back to his side, cowed and awed. Izuku stood before the malignant core. It was terrified. He could feel its fear, a childish, spiteful thing. It had been a scream in the void for so long, it had forgotten what silence was. He raised a hand, not to destroy, to reclaim. He touched the pulsating mass. Agony, not his, but the corruption's, flooded through him. A lifetime of stolen pain, consumed fear, devoured hopes. It was a torrent of screaming memories that were not his own. He saw the faces of the forgotten, felt their final moments of despair. It was a weight meant to crush any soul. But the stillness inside him was not a soul. It was a throne, and a throne bears the weight of a kingdom. He did not absorb the pain. He did not make it his. He acknowledged it. He sanctified it. In the profound quiet of his will, the screaming found no echo. It simply ceased. The stolen essences, the fragmented light of the consumed, were not lost. They were released, not to return to life, but to fade into the peaceful, natural dark from which all things come and to which all things return. The physical form of the corruption reacted violently. The thorny mass wreathed, the purple light flaring like a dying star. It tried to fight, to pull back, to feed on his offered stillness as it had fed on everything else. But you cannot consume a void. You cannot devour a king in his own court. With a final, silent sigh that echoed in the hearts of everyone present, the corruption unmade itself. The pulsing core dimmed. The thorny tendrils crumbled to dust. The oily veins on the walls faded, leaving behind clean, if scarred, concrete. The greasy, rotten scent vanished, replaced by the simple, damp smell of earth and stone. The cavern was just a cavern again. Empty, quiet, cleansed. Izuku lowered his hand. The cloak of shadows around him dissipated. He felt tired, a deep, soul-level weariness. But unharmed, uncorrupted. He turned to his team. They were staring at him as if he had just rewritten the laws of physics. Which, in a way, he had. Kirishima's hardened skin had reverted, his mouth slightly agape. Jiro had pulled off her helmet, her face pale. Yaoyorozu's eyes were shining with unshed tears, not of fear, but of a profound, overwhelming relief. Tokiyami bowed his head deeply, Dark Shadow mirroring the gesture. It's over, Izuku said, his voice hoarse but clear in the new silence. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, Kirishima let out a shaky, explosive breath. Dude, it broke the spell. Jiro slid down the wall to sit on the floor, laughing a little hysterically. You just talked it to death. With your mind. Yaoyorozu approached him, her steps careful on the newly cleaned floor. She stopped before him, her leader's mask gone, replaced by raw awe. Midoriya, what did you do? I gave it peace, he said simply. And it was the truth. He hadn't conquered. He had healed a festering wound in the world's shadow. Tokiyami joined them. The hunger is gone. The silence, it is a true silence now. Not an absence, but a completion. He met Izuku's eyes. You were magnificent. The comms crackled in their ears. Team, report. We're reading massive energy fluctuation and then a complete drop-off. What is your status? It was Izuku, voice tight with controlled alarm. Yaoyorozu keyed her mic, her voice steadying. Mission accomplished, Sensei. The anomaly has been neutralized. No casualties. We're all okay. The relief on the other end was palpable, even through the static. As they began the trek back to the surface, the dynamic had shifted utterly. The distance was gone. Kirishima clapped Izuku on the back with a grin that was back to its full, sharp-toothed glory. King of the Shadows, ha! That's the manliest thing I've ever seen. Jiro walked beside him, no longer watching him like a puzzle, but with a new, grounded respect. Yaoyorozu discussed the tactical implications of his abilities with a fervent, analytical excitement. He had done it. He had fought the darkness with darkness and won. He had saved the day without breaking a single bone, without leaving a single enemy behind bars. But by offering something they had never considered, peace. As they emerged into the cool night air, greeted by the anxious faces of Izuku, All Might, and the Commission observers, Izuku felt a fragile hope. He had proven the Sovereign could be a hero. He had shown his power could heal, not just conquer. But as he met All Might's eyes, he saw the pride there, yes, but beneath it, a deeper, more complex emotion. Not fear anymore, but a kind of sorrowful awe. His successor had not just grown stronger. He had transcended the very paradigm of strength All Might represented. And as the transport carried them back to UA, the cleansed cavern behind them, Izuku knew the victory was complete. Yet, in the quiet of his own mind, a new, unsettling thought took root. The corruption was a sickness. He had cured it, but what, in a world of blinding light and shouted virtues, had caused the shadow to grow sick in the first place? Chapter 11. The Echoes of a Silent Victory. The aftermath of the mission was a study in contrasts. The physical world moved on with bureaucratic efficiency. There were debriefings, medical checks, mountains of reports filed with the Commission. The official story, leaked in careful drips to the press, spoke of a successful joint operation against a biohazardous entity in the metro system, crediting a task force of UA students and pros. No names, no details about shadows or consumption. It was wrapped in the bland language of security, filed away, and largely forgotten by a public hungry for the glittering spectacle of daylight heroics. But within the walls of UA, the silence of that cavern echoed loudly. For Izuku's team, the bond forged in the deep dark was unshakable. They were his circle now, his first true court. Kirishima greeted him every morning with a hardened fist bump and the new, earnest nickname, Shadow King, which Izuku tried and failed to dissuade. Jiro no longer just listened to sounds. She listened to him asterisk. Her keen ears picking up the subtle shifts in his tone, the faint hum of power that was his new baseline. She'd toss him a knowing look when he was straining to appear normal, a silent offer of understanding. Yaoyorozu engaged him in deep, late-night strategy sessions, not just about quirk use, but about the philosophical implications of a power that could pacify as well as destroy. She saw him not as a weapon, but as a new class of humanitarian tool. And Tokiyami became his anchor. They spent hours in quiet spaces, not always speaking. Tokiyami would meditate, and Izuku would simply exist in the stillness. Their two forms of darkness, one hosted, one inherent, communing in a way words could never capture. You have brought order to the chaos within me, Tokiyami confessed one evening. Dark shadow coiled peacefully at his feet like a tame panther. Before, it was a cage match. Now, it is a dialogue. You have shown Dark Shadow what true mastery looks like. Not suppression, but harmony. This acceptance was a balm. But it was an island in a sea of changed perceptions. The rest of Class 1A now regarded him with a wary, complicated respect. The fear had lessened, replaced by a kind of awe that was its own form of distance. He was no longer just the classmate who broke his bones. He was the one who had gone into an unspeakable place with a hand-picked team and come back whole. Having solved a problem none of them could even comprehend. They treated him like a visiting dignitary. Polite, curious, but never fully relaxed. Uraraka's smiles were still bright, but held a question she couldn't voice. Ida's interactions were impeccably respectful, yet he no longer included Izuku in his meticulous plans for class unity. The easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by the quiet deference given to a force of nature. Bakugo's fury had condensed into a cold, focused obsession. He trained alone, longer and harder than anyone. He didn't speak to Izuku, didn't even look at him most of the time. But Izuku could feel the heat of his focus like a laser on the back of his neck. Bakugo was no longer trying to prove he was stronger than Deku. He was trying to decipher an equation that had rewritten itself. All Might was the most painful change. His pride was genuine, his relief profound. But there was a new hesitance in his mentorship. Their training sessions continued, but All Might's advice felt outdated. He spoke of power thresholds, of smiling to reassure citizens, of the crushing weight of a symbol. Izuku listened, but the concepts felt like instructions for sailing a wooden ship when he now commanded the ocean itself. The distance between one for all, the pinnacle of human strength, and the Shadow Monarch, sovereign of an elemental force, was a chasm neither of them knew how to bridge. One afternoon, after a session where Izuku had effortlessly demonstrated a shadow technique that could contain a simulated building collapse without a single tremor of strain, All Might sat heavily on a training block. "You make it look so simple," he murmured, not looking at Izuku. "There's no strain, no dramatic cry, just a thought, and it is done. Power I gave you. It feels like a shout in the middle of a library now. Necessary, perhaps, but crude." "It's not crude," Izuku said quickly, sitting beside him. "It's different. It's a hammer. What I have, it's a sculptor's chisel. They're both tools. But a hammer is a hero's tool, my boy," All Might said, his blue eyes tired. Loud, decisive, clear for all to see. A chisel, it works in the quiet, in the details. People need to see the hammer. They need to believe in it. He placed a skeletal hand on Izuku's shoulder. "I fear the world is not ready for a king who works in silence." It was the core of the problem. His victory was silent. There were no videos of him triumphing over the corruption, no explosive finale for the news cycles. His power didn't produce flashy rescues or dramatic villain takedowns in the street. It was subtle, profound, and invisible to the cameras that fed the public's need for spectacle. This truth crystallized during a class debate on modern heroics and public perception. The topic was the sustainability of symbol heroes like All Might. "People need a light to follow," Ojiro argued. "Something simple and bright. But what about the problems that don't happen in the light?" Izuku heard himself say. The class quieted, turning to him. "What about the things that grow in the corners, in the quiet places everyone ignores because they're not glamorous to fight? A symbol of pure light, it casts very deep shadows." He hadn't meant it as a critique of All Might. It was just an observation. But it landed in the room like a stone. Bakugo, who had been silent, finally spoke. His voice low and sharp. "So what, you saying we need a symbol of darkness now? Someone to skulk in the alleys and do the dirty work the glamorous heroes won't? That's not a hero. That's a glorified janitor." The old Izuku would have stammered, backtracked. The monarch felt the challenge to his domain. "Cleaning the filth no one else sees or wants to touch isn't a lesser job, Bakugo," he said. His voice calm but carrying. "It's a foundational one. Let the symbols have the sky. Someone has to tend to the roots." The class held its breath, waiting for an explosion. Bakugo only smirked. "A nasty, knowing thing. Tend the roots. Right, and what happens when the roots decide they don't need the tree anymore, Deku? What happens when the shadows get tired of being underneath?" The question hung there, ugly and profound. It was the fear unspoken by the commission, by All Might, by everyone who saw his power. Not that he would turn evil, but that he would simply render their concept of good obsolete. After class, as Izuku packed his bag alone, a soft voice spoke beside him. "You're thinking too much in opposites." It was Todoroki. He leaned against the next desk, his expression as inscrutable as ever. "Light and dark, sky and roots. It's a very elemental way of seeing things. But the world isn't that clean." "What do you mean?" Izuku asked. "I spent half my life thinking I had to choose one half of myself and reject the other," Todoroki said, looking at his own left hand, a tiny wisp of steam curling from his palm. "It nearly destroyed me. My father's fire, my mother's ice, they're not at war. They just are. Together, they're me." His heterochromatic eyes met Izuku's. "Maybe it's not about the symbol of light or the king of shadows. Maybe it's about what happens in the dawn and the dusk. The places where they meet. That's where most of the world actually lives, you know." Not in the blinding noon, or the dead of night, but in the twilight. It was the most Todoroki had ever said to him at once. And it was a lifeline. A new way of seeing. The twilight, asterisk. The place where the Umbra lived. The place where his power had its most natural domain. Not as a ruler of the night, but as the guardian of the transition. The protector of the vulnerable spaces between absolutes. The idea took root, quiet and sure. It didn't answer Bakugo's challenge, but it reframed it. He didn't have to be the anti-All Might. He could be the bridge. Later that week, a small, official-looking envelope was slipped under his dorm room door. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored paper. The message was typed. The silent solution is often the most elegant. Your handling of the Metro incident demonstrates a.m. maturity of power and judgment beyond your years. The Commission is interested in fostering unique talents that operate outside standard paradigms. Consider this an invitation to a private symposium on unconventional threat resolution. Discretion, of course, is paramount. Asterisk. Beneath was a date, time, and an address in a wealthy, discreet district of Tokyo. It was stamped with a small, embossed seal. 2 stylized wings encircling a balanced scale. The Hero Public Safety Commission. They hadn't filed him away. They were making an offer. A quiet, powerful offer to step out of UA's curriculum and into the shadows of the official world. He held the invitation, feeling its weight. It was a path to legitimacy, to using his power with official sanction, away from the confused eyes of his classroom. Attis and the sorrowful gaze of his mentor. It was also a gilded cage. A way to make the King of Shadows a useful, secret tool of the state. He looked from the invitation to the window, where the last tea-light of day was bleeding into twilight, painting the world in shades of purple and gold. The silent victory had won him respect, fear, understanding, and now, a tempting offer. But it had also placed him at a crossroads. Standing perfectly in the dusk, asked to choose between the fading light of his old dream and the deep, sovereign night that now coursed through his veins. And in the gathering dark outside, he thought he saw, just for a moment, the shape of a small, shadowy sparrow perched on a branch, watching him. Waiting to see what the king would choose. Chapter 12. The Symposium of Scales and Shadows. The address led to a place of silent wealth. A minimalist, concrete and glass building nestled among ginkgo trees in a district where the streets were clean enough to eat from. And the only sound was the whisper of automatic sprinklers. It was not a government office. It looked more like a high-end architectural firm or a private clinic for the discreetly superpowered. The name by the discreet keypad read simply, Athenaeum Group. Asterisk. Izuku pressed the buzzer, the commission's embossed invitation a hard rectangle in his pocket. The door clicked open with a soft, expensive sound. Inside, the air was cool, filtered, and smelled of sandalwood and ozone. The reception area was empty save for a single chair and a large, abstract painting that seemed to shift colors when looked at from the corner of the eye. A hidden speaker emitted a calm, androgynous voice. Midoriya Izuku, please proceed to the elevator. 3rd floor. The elevator was a cube of frosted glass. It ascended without a sensation of movement. When the doors opened, he stepped into a room that defied the building's austere exterior. It was a library from a dream. Dark wood shelves rose 2 stories, crammed with books, scrolls, and data slates. A mezzanine level wrapped around, accessible by a spiral staircase. The lighting was warm, golden, and came from nowhere in particular, illuminating the CH colors of Persian rugs and leather armchairs. In the center of the room stood a long table of polished black stone, and around it sat 6 people. He recognized 2 immediately. The sharp-featured commission representative from the council meeting sat at the head, his suit even crisper here. And beside him, to Izuku's surprise, was the pro-hero Sir Nighteye, All Might's former sidekick. His air face was impassive behind his glasses, his green hair perfectly still. His presence was a cold shock, a direct link to All Might's world, here in this clandestine room. The other 4 were strange. R.S., a severe-looking woman with her hair in a tight silver bun, a young man with intelligent eyes who was tapping a holographic screen floating above his wrist, an older gentleman with the weathered hands of a craftsman, and a woman who seemed to blur at the edges of Izuku's vision, as if she wasn't entirely committed to being present. Welcome, Midoriya-kun, the commission man said, not smiling. Please, sit. I am Director Saito. You know Sir Niteye. These are specialists in fields relevant to your unique situation. Quirk theory, metaphysical biology, covert operations, and cognitive security. Sir Niteye's gold-flecked eyes tracked Izuku's every movement as he took the empty seat. The scrutiny was intense, analytical, utterly devoid of the emotional weight All Might carried. This was an assessment of an asset. The Metro incident, Saito began, steepling his fingers. We have reviewed all data, including the Umbra's testimony and the sensor logs from your team's gear. The N-TTU pacified registered as a class or existential anomaly. Current hero protocols have no classification for pacified. They have for destroyed, contained, or neutralized. You created a new category. That is of immense interest to us. The quirk theory specialist, the young man, leaned forward. Your power interaction suggests a hierarchical command over energetic structures perceived as shadow or negation. You didn't overpower the anomaly. You convinced it to cease. The implications for dealing with sentient quirk manifestations, berserk mutants, even certain types of eye, are revolutionary. The cost efficiency is unparalleled, the covert ops woman, the blurry one, said, her voice seeming to come from slightly left of her body. No property damage, no civilian panic, no drawn-out battle, a surgical solution, the kind of solution we need for problems the public can never know about. Sir Niteye finally spoke. His voice was dry, precise, like pages turning. All Might's power is a beacon. It draws conflict to itself. It solves problems by being a larger, brighter target. Your power, conversely, seems to dissolve conflict. It removes the target altogether. He adjusted his glasses. A useful counterpart, but a dangerous one if its limits are not defined. Can you pacify a human villain? Not their quirk, but their will to fight. Where is the line between therapy and tyranny? The question was a scalpel. It was the question that had kept Izuku awake. I don't know, Izuku answered honestly, meeting Niteye's gaze. I haven't tried. I wouldn't want to. Intent is a fragile shield. Young man, the cognitive security woman, Silver Bun, said. What you want matters less than what you can do. And our job is to understand the can, so we can guide the should. The symposium unfolded. It was not an interrogation, but a dissection. They presented him with hypotheticals. A sentient forest of darkness consuming a town. A villain whose quirk was infectious despair. A hostage situation in a lightless bunker. They asked not for demonstrations, but for his thought process. How would he approach it? What would he fear? What would be the optimal outcome? For the first time, Izuku talked about his power with people who weren't afraid of it, but fascinated by its utility. They spoke a language of thresholds, vectors, and ethical parameters. It was cold, but it was clear. There were no tears, no disappointed looks, no fearful classmates. Just the stark geometry of problem and solution. Director Saito slid a slim tablet across the black stone table. On it was a draft document. A contract. The Athena Initiative, Saito said. A pilot program for exceptional talents whose abilities fall outside standard hero licensure. It offers advanced, private training, access to restricted research, and, upon graduation, a unique licensure that allows for operation in gray zones. With direct oversight from this committee. It was everything he'd been tacitly offered. Legitimacy, purpose, a way to use his kingship without apology. You would remain a UA student publicly, the craftsman-like man said, his voice gravelly. But your true development would be here. We would help you refine your control, map your limits, define your code. You would become not just a wielder of this power, but its master architect. Sir Niteye's gaze was heavy. All Might sees a successor gone astray. I see a new branch on the tree. His way is not the only way. But walking a new path requires a map. We can provide that map. The offer was seductive in its clarity. It was a way out of the confusion, the sideways glances, the painful gap between himself and All Might. But as he looked at the expectant faces around the table, he saw no Hana with her gentle wisdom. No Kirishima with his unwavering heart, no Tokiyami with his shared burden. He saw strategists. He saw the scales of the Commission's emblem, being balanced. He would be a weight on that scale. A very useful, unique weight. Can I think about it? Izuku asked, his voice sounding small in the vast, knowledge-filled room. Of course, Saito said, a thin smile touching his lips. Take the tablet. Review the terms. We are not recruiters of villains. We are cultivators of necessary solutions. You have a week. The elevator descent felt like falling back into the messy, loud, emotional world. The silent, rational sanctuary of the Athenaeum was already clinging to him, a ghost of a possible future. He didn't go straight back to UA. He walked, aimless, through the fading afternoon. His feet carried him, unsurprisingly, to Dagobah Municipal Beach. It was clean now, a testament to his and All Might's old, grueling, simple work. A symbol of progress anyone could see. He sat on the sand, watching the waves turn from blue to indigo as the sun dipped towards the horizon. The twilight, he pulled out the commission's tablet, scrolling through the dry, legal language of the contract. It promised resources, guidance, a defined role. It promised to make him a sanctioned shadow. Then he pulled out his phone. Scrolling through his photos, he found one, a candid shot taken by Ashido after the culture festival. It was blurry, off-center. In it, he was laughing, really laughing, head thrown back, surrounded by Uraraka, Ida, Sue, and Kirishima, who had him in a headlock. His eyes were squeezed shut. His smile was too wide, and he looked painfully, wonderfully young. It was a photo of the boy who carried All Might's dream. That boy felt like a ghost now. But the memory of that feeling, that simple, sunlit joy, a shadow fell across the sand beside him. He didn't need to look up. He felt the familiar, fiery aura, tamped down to a smolder. Bakugo stood there, hands in his pockets, glaring at the ocean as if it had insulted him. He'd clearly followed him. They stayed that way for a long minute, the only sound the crash and hiss of the waves. They made you an offer, Bakugo stated, not a question. Izuku didn't ask how he knew. Bakugo had his ways. Yeah, gonna take it. Become their secret little shadow weapon. I don't know. Bakugo snorted. Figures. Always overthinking. He finally looked down at Izuku, his crimson eyes narrowed. That place. The commission's fancy hidey hole. They see a tool. A really fancy, dangerous tool. They'll polish you, point you, and use you to clean up the messes their shiny heroes make. And you'll do it, because you're a damn hero nerd who can't say no to helping. Izuku said nothing. It was probably true. But here's the thing, Deku asterisk. Bakugo said, spitting the old name like a challenge. A tool gets used. It doesn't choose. It sits on a shelf until someone needs it. He kicked at the sand. A king chooses. Even if he's a shitty, creepy shadow king. He met Izuku's eyes, and for once, there was no hatred, just a fierce, grudging clarity. So what's it gonna be? You gonna sit on their shelf? Or are you gonna build your own damn throne, right out here in the open, where everyone has to deal with it? With that, Bakugo turned and stalked away, leaving deeper footprints in the wet sand than should have been possible. Izuku stared after him, stunned. It wasn't support. It was a challenge from the last person he'd expected to understand the choice at all. The sun finally slipped below the horizon. The world was in full twilight now. The sky was a masterpiece of deepening blue, purple, and the last streaks of orange. The shadows were long and soft. He looked at the commission's tablet, a rectangle of cold light in the gathering dark. He looked at the blurry, sunlit photo on his phone. He looked at the vast, open beach, cleansed by simple, hard work. A tool on a shelf. Or a king in the twilight. The invitation was a door to a clean, quiet, powerful future. But as the first stars pricked through the velvet sky, Izuku Midoriya knew, with a calm that settled deep into the stillness of his bones, that his throne would not be in a silent library under the commission's scales. It would be here, in the messy, emotional, real world, where the light and the dark met, and he would have to build it himself. Chapter 13. The Weight of the Crown. The contract on the tablet expired, untouched. Izuku didn't formally decline. He simply never responded. The silence, he suspected, was answer enough for people like Director Saito. A door had closed, not with a slam, but with the quiet finality of a shadow passing over a threshold. Life at UA did not magically revert. The distance with most of the class remained, a polite buffer of awe. All Might's tutorials continued to be fraught with unspoken sorrow. But something had shifted within Izuku. The temptation of a clean, Sanctioned path had clarified his own messy one. He had chosen the twilight. Now he had to learn how to stand in it. His first act as a self-proclaimed king in exile was to seek an audience with his first subject. He found Tokiyami in one of the campus meditation gardens, sitting perfectly still beneath a gnarled pine as the early evening bled the color from the sky. "Fumikage," Izuku said, sitting on the stone bench beside him. "I need your counsel." Tokiyami's eyes opened, red slits in the gloom. The sovereign seeks advice from his vassal. The student seeks advice from his friend, Izuku corrected softly. "I turned down the commission. I'm staying here. In the light, sort of. But I can't keep being a puzzle. Or a threat. I need to find a way to be this," he gestured vaguely at himself. "And still be a hero everyone here can understand. Or at least not fear." Dark shadow peeked from Tokiyami's collar, its yellow eyes curious. Tokiyami was silent for a long moment. Ish to integrate the monarchy with the democracy of the classroom. A difficult consolidation of power. He steepled his fingers. "You have shown the destructive and pacifying potential of your reign. But a king is not just a warrior or a healer. He is also a provider, a facilitator. What does your kingdom give to those who dwell in its shade?" The question was a key turning in a lock. Izuku had been thinking of his power in terms of combat, rescue, or negation. Not utility, not gift. The opportunity to test this new perspective came unexpectedly in Foundational Heroes studies the next week. The exercise was a chaotic, large-scale simulated disaster in an urban maze, a combination of earthquake, fire, and simulated gas leaks. Students were scattered, acting as both victims and rescuers in a confusing, smoky tangle. Communication was jammed. Visibility was near zero. Chaos reigned. Izuku could hear the shouts, the crashes, the frustrated cries of classmates trying to coordinate blindly. He stood in a side street, smoke stinging his eyes, the old urge to charge in and smash obstacles warring with the new, calm understanding that smashing would only add to the wreckage. A king provides. He closed his eyes, sinking into the stillness. He pushed his awareness not outwards in a searching spike, but downwards, in a gentle, spreading pull. He felt the structure of the training ground through the shadows cast by rubble. The thermal shapes of his classmates, the layout of streets and dead ends. It was a map painted in negative space inside his mind. He didn't command soldiers. He nurtured connections. From the pool of darkness at his own feet, thin, thread-like tendrils of shadow shot out, not towards people, but along the ground, flowing like ink through the cracks in the simulated city. They were insubstantial, barely visible in the smoke. They reached Ashido, who was trying to melt a fallen beam to free Koda. The shadow thread didn't help her. It touched her ankle, a fleeting, cool sensation. And in that touch, Izuku imparted a single, clear image into her mind, the safest path around the next corner, leading to a group of victim drones. Ashido jerked, blinking. Whoa, freaky, but okay. She changed direction, following the unseen guidance. Another thread found Sero, tangled in his own tape. It brushed his hand, delivering an image of the precise anchor point he needed to swing to safety. A third found Shoji, extending an image map of the entire western quadrant, showing the locations of 3 trapped students. He wasn't controlling them. He was informing them, giving them the gift of sight in the blindness. The exercise transformed. Confused shouts turned into coordinated action. Rescue times plummeted. The simulated casualties dropped to 0. When the all-clear sounded and the smoke systems shut off, the class stood blinking in the sudden clarity, looking at each other in bewildered triumph. "What the hell was that?" Kaminari asked, rubbing his head. "I just knew where to go. It was like a whisper in my head," Ashido said, grinning. A super helpful, creepy whisper. Yayorozu looked directly at Izuku, who stood quietly by a dented lamppost. She smiled, a real, understanding smile. A command network. Non-verbal, instantaneous. "That's brilliant, Midoriya." It wasn't a flashy victory. There were no vanquished villains, no dramatic saves. He had been a living communications hub, a nervous system for the class. A provider. The reaction was different this time. There was still awe, but it was mixed with something new, gratitude. Utility. He had made the jobs easier. He had been a team player, not a one-man army. Aizawa, observing from the control booth, gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was the highest praise he'd ever offered. After the debrief, as they filed back to the locker rooms, Uraraka fell into step beside Izuku. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "That was really amazing, Deku. It didn't feel scary. It felt like you were right there with all of us, even though you were across the zone." She bumped his shoulder with hers, a familiar, friendly gesture that had been absent for weeks. "It felt like you were back." The simple words healed a wound he hadn't fully acknowledged. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed being just another part of the group. The success with Tactica L Shadow Communication opened a floodgate of experimentation. He began working privately with Yaoyorozu and Jiro, exploring synergies. He could use shadows to carry Jiro's sound pulses around corners, creating a sonar network. He could form dark, soundproof chambers for Yaoyorozu to create delicate tools in the middle of a chaotic battlefield. He was becoming a force multiplier, a silent enhancer of others' strengths. But a king's responsibilities are not all gifts. One evening, a different kind of summons came. Not from the commission, nor from a teacher. A plain, folded note was left on his desk. The sickness was a symptom. The cause remains. The roots are deeper than you know. The silent war continues. Come to the tea house. Tonight, asterisk. It was unsigned, but the velvety texture of the script was Hana's. A chill that had nothing to do with his power traced his spine. The corruption was gone, but the Umbra spoke of a cause. A war. He went after curfew, flowing through the shadows the city with a purpose that felt heavier than before. The tea house was as warm and quiet as ever, but the atmosphere was tense. The usual gentle smiles were gone, replaced by solemn faces. Hana and Jiro, the elder, waited for him at the sunken table. The cleansing was a great victory, Sovereign, Hana began, her voice low. You restored balance to a poisoned place. But in the wake of that balance, we have been able to listen more clearly to the whispers of the world's dark. And we hear, not one sickness, but many. Seeds, sprouts of the same blight, scattered. We believe the corruption you faced was not the source. It was a tumor. The cancer is elsewhere. A cancer? Izuku asked, dread pulling in his stomach. Jiro the elder nodded, his gnarled hands tracing a pattern on the table. Something is creating the sickness in the shadows. Something that feeds on conflict, on despair, on the sharp divisions between light and dark. Where heroes and villains clash most violently, where fear is thickest. The shadows grow, tender, vulnerable to infection. We believe it is a deliberate act. A cultivation of blight. The implications were staggering. A villain they couldn't fight, because they didn't fight in the light. An enemy that didn't throw punches, but nurtured spiritual decay in the unseen corners of the world. Who? Izuku breathed. We do not know a name, Hana said. Quote, only a title that whispers in the oldest, coldest silences. The sower of discord. The one who waits in the cracks. She met his eyes, her gaze grave. Your power is the antithesis. Where they sow sickness, you can command health. Where they cultivate chaos in the dark, you can impose order. You are the natural enemy. And now that you have revealed yourself by cleansing the tumor, they will know you are here. It was a declaration of war on a front he was only just learning to see. He wasn't just a hero for natural disasters and bank robbers. He was a physician for the soul of the world itself. What do I do? Learn, Jiro said. Learn to see the infection before it blossoms. Learn to trace the sickness back to its source. Your connection to the dark is your diagnostic tool. Listen to the shadows of this city. When they taste bitter, when they feel afraid of themselves, follow that taste. He returned to UA as the first hints of dawn grayed the sky. The weight of the crown felt different now. Heavier. It was no longer just about controlling power or finding a place among his friends. It was a duty to a hidden, aching part of reality. He stood on the dorm rooftop, not in despair as before, but in solemn vigil. He stretched out his senses, as Hana instructed. He listened to the sleeping city's shadow. Most of it was peaceful. The quiet dark of homes, the gentle gloom of parks. But at the edges of his awareness, faint, sour notes. A flicker of greasy fear from the red light district. A thrum of angry tension from a distant, run-down neighborhood where hope was thin. A cold, hollow spot near the industrial docks that felt, scraped clean, like a wound that wouldn't heal. Seeds, sprouts. He opened his eyes. The sun was rising, turning the sky peach and gold. The symbol of peace smiled from billboards, fighting the battles everyone could see. Izuku Midoriya turned his back on the sunrise and looked at the long, deep shadows the new day cast behind the buildings. His battle was here, in the quiet places, in the wounds no one else could see. He was no longer just a student, or a successor, or even just a king. He was a doctor for a sickened knight, and his first real patient was the world itself. And in the silence of his soul, the throne of obsidian no longer felt like a burden, or a prize. It felt like a surgeon's chair. And the surgery was about to begin. Chapter 14. The Patient World. The world became a patient under Izuku's new, grim diagnosis. His days at UA were a double life, split between the vibrant, demanding schedule of a hero student and the silent, solitary work of a shadow physician. He attended classes, participated in exercises, laughed at Kaminari's terrible jokes, and discussed tactics with Yaoyorozu. He was present, engaged, a part of the whole. But beneath the surface, a part of him was always listening, a stethoscope pressed to the city's dark heart. The sour notes he'd sensed became his map. He couldn't and on his studies to chase every whisper, but he began taking deliberate, sanctioned walks after class with Aizawa's begrudging permission, controlling reconnaissance, they called it. He'd wander into less savory districts, not as a hero on patrol, but as a quiet boy in a UA uniform, feeling the texture of the shadows. The red light district's fear was a shallow, greasy thing, born of quick transactions and quicker violence. It was a surface infection. He'd linger in an alley, and with a gentle push of his will, he'd encourage the local darkness to be just a little more solid. A trash can lid would fall with a clatter just as a pickpocket reached for a wallet. A particularly deep shadow would seem to shift, making a lurking figure feel watched, prompting them to move on. Small nudges, subtle corrections, treating symptoms to prevent a fever. The angry tension from the run-down neighborhood was deeper, a chronic ache. Here, the shadows felt brittle, like over-dried kindling ready to catch a spark. He couldn't fix poverty or systemic neglect, but he could listen. He'd sit on a rusted playground swing at dusk, and through the medium of the dark, he'd sense the roiling emotions and the cramped apartments around him, a father's despair, a teenager's pent-up rage, a child's quiet loneliness. One evening, he felt a particularly sharp spike of fury from a teenager about to throw a brick through a store window. Izuku focused, not on the boy, but on the long shadow of a broken street lamp behind him. He gave it the slightest suggestion of movement, of a looming presence. The boy froze, the brick slipping from his fingers, his anger momentarily eclipsed by primal fear. He ran, a small crisis averted, a match not struck, but the cold, hollow spot near the industrial docks was different. It wasn't an emotion, it was an absence, a place where the shadow felt necrotic, deadened. This was a wound, not an infection. He approached it one overcast afternoon, the salt-tinged eye doing nothing to mask the psychic chill. It was an abandoned warehouse, half collapsed into the oily water. The shadow within wasn't just dark. It was empty. It drank the light and gave back nothing, not even the peaceful silence of true dark. It was the scar left behind where the corruption's tumor had been cut from the city's body. He stepped inside, the crunch of his boots on broken glass obscenely loud in the consuming quiet. This was where the victims had been taken, their light devoured until only hollow belongings remained. The air was still, cold, and tasted of dust and forgotten endings. He knelt in the center of the space, placing his palms on the grimy concrete. He reached out with his sovereignty, not to command, but to feel the wound. The memory of the devoured echoed here, not as voices, but as shaped voids in the fabric of the local dark. He could almost trace their outlines. A man who loved jazz, a woman afraid of thunderstorms, a child who collected bottle caps. Stories ended mid-sentence. This wasn't something he could nudge or scare away. This was a trauma, and trauma required healing, not warfare. He didn't know if it was possible, but he was a king, and this was his wounded land. He drew the deep, calm stillness from within himself and began, for lack of a better word, to pour it into the hollow space. He didn't fill it with his own power. He offered his stillness as a template, a balm. He encouraged the natural, peaceful shadows of the world, the kind that existed under leaves, in the curve of a sleeping cat's back, to remember this place. To gently seep back in. It was agonizingly slow, like persuading blood to flow back into a necrotic limb. He felt the resistance, the memory of pain and violation that made the darkness here recoil from itself. He stayed for hours, until the sun dipped low and the real night began to fall outside. Sweat beaded on his forehead, not from exertion, but from the profound, psychic focus. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the hollow quality began to soften. The deadened silence gained a texture, the faint, distant hum of the city, the lap of water against pilings. The shadow in the warehouse was no longer a scar. It was becoming a shadow again. A quiet, sad one, but a living part of the whole. When he finally stood, his legs stiff and his mind frayed, the warehouse felt different. Still abandoned, still tragic. But it no longer felt cursed. It felt at rest. He had healed a place. The cost was a deep, echoing fatigue that sleep couldn't touch. But the satisfaction was a quiet warmth in the center of his stillness. This was his purpose, not just fighting monsters in the dark, but healing the dark itself. He reported his findings to Izuku and Nezu in vague terms, speaking of residual and anomalous energy, and passive remediation techniques. They accepted it, adding to the growing file on his unique capabilities. The Umbra, when he visited Hannah, simply smiled with knowing tears in her eyes. You learn fast, young king. You see the difference between cutting out a disease and tending to the health of the body. But the sower of discord, the cause of the sickness, remained a phantom. Tracing the sour notes back led nowhere definitive. They were symptoms of a society under stress, points where light and dark clashed violently. The true enemy was an idea, a cultivated despair, and ideas were harder to fight than monsters. The pressure built in other ways. Bakugo's cold observation had turned into a fierce, parallel training regimen. He was no longer trying to beat Deku. He was trying to build something that could exist in the same world as the Shadow Monarch. Izuku would feel explosions in a distant training ground long after hours, a relentless, sun-like fury burning against the night. As if Bakugo was trying to create a light so bright it could never be eclipsed. And then, the test came. Not from the shadows, but from the light. It was a live villain attack downtown, broadcast on every screen. A villain with a chaos quirk. He didn't attack people directly, but could hyper-stimulate emotions in an area, turning crowds into panicked, violent mobs. Maken. G heroes turn on each other in paranoia and rage. It was psychological warfare, and the heroes on the scene, including several top 20 pros, were being overwhelmed by their own amplified fear and aggression. The news helicopters showed a nightmare. Heroes fighting each other, civilians trampling one another, buildings on fire from misplaced quirks. The villain, a gaunt man laughing in the center of the square, was untouched. Bathing in the anarchy he'd sown. At UA, the classes were gathered in the common room, watching in horrified silence. All Might's face on the screen was a mask of grim fury. But even he seemed unsure how to punch a feeling. Izuku felt it before he saw it on the screen. A wave of psychic distortion, a scream of amplified fear and rage, rolling through the city's emotional spectrum. And in its wake, the shadows of that downtown district, they curdled. They became jagged, reflexive, infected with the very chaos the villain was spreading. It was a perfect example of the sower's work, taking a conflict and making the very environment sick with it. He stood up. Every eye in the room turned to him. You can't, Uraraka said, her voice small. It's too chaotic. They won't know friend from foe out there. Even you. That's not how I fight, Izuku said, his voice calm. He looked at Izuku, who had appeared in the doorway, his capture weapon already unwound. Sensei, permission to assist. Izuku studied him, then the screen, where another hero was accidentally frozen in a block of her own partner's ice. He gave a single, sharp nod. Go, but you do not engage the villain. You are support. Your mission is to create a zone of stability. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Izuku would be his escort, his tether to the rules of daylight heroics. They arrived on the periphery of the chaos. The noise was a physical wall, screams, explosions, the villain's mad laughter. The emotional pressure was like a fever dream. Izuku felt his own breath quicken with a spike of irrational fear. Izuku's eyes glowed red, but erasure did nothing to a quirk that had already done its work and was now just feeding on the consequences. Do it, Izuku gritted out, fighting to keep his own professional calm. Izuku closed his eyes, sinking past the noise, past the fear, into the deep, quiet well of his sovereignty. He didn't attack the chaos. He envisioned its opposite, not peace, that was too abstract. He envisioned stillness, a bubble of absolute, silent calm. He planted his feet and pushed. The effect was not visible to the cameras, but on the ground, it was immediate. A wave of quiet radiated from him, flowing through the connected shadows of the battlefield. It didn't suppress emotions. It created a buffer, a cushion. In the zone of his influence, the amplified rage didn't vanish. But it lost its edge. The paralyzing fear became a manageable anxiety. A hero about to blast a confused colleague stopped, shook his head, and instead redirected his attack to put out a fire. A trampling crowd slowed, people looking around in dazed confusion, the blind panic receding. The bubble of stillness expanded, pushing back against the psychic infection. The shadows in the area smoothed, the jagged, chaotic twitching subsiding into normal, peaceful dark. The villain's laughter cut off. He stared, confused, as his perfect chaos began to unravel at the edges. He focused his quirk, pouring more power into the area around Izuku. The emotional storm hit the wall of stillness and broke against it, like waves against a cliff. Izuku didn't falter. He was the cliff. He was the unwavering, silent bedrock beneath the storm. With the psychological pressure lifted, the pro-heroes regrouped. Coordinated, calm, they moved in. The villain, his primary weapon neutralized, was quickly subdued. The cameras didn't show Izuku. They showed the heroes triumphing, the crowds calming. They showed the symbol of peace helping people to their feet. The narrative would be about the pro's resilience. But on the edge of the frame, for a single, fleeting second, a news helicopter's camera caught a glimpse. Aizawa-sensei, standing protectively beside a green-haired boy who was on his knees, head bowed. Not in exhaustion, but in what looked like profound concentration. And around them, the shadows on the street lay perfectly still and deep, as if holding their breath. The broadcast cut away, but the image was out there. Izuku opened his eyes as the police moved in. The stillness receded, leaving him drained but whole. He had not thrown a punch. He had not summoned an army. He had simply been a place where the storm could not rage. Aizawa looked down at him, his erasure deactivated. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, that was acceptable work, Midoriya. High praise. As they turned to leave, Izuku felt a new kind of gaze on him. Not from the crowds, not from the cameras. From the shadows of a nearby alley, a deeper, more calculating observation. A presence that watched the king not with fear or awe, but with cold, clinical interest. It was gone before he could pinpoint it, leaving only a faint, metallic aftertaste in the local dark. He had passed the test of the light, stabilizing a chaos he didn't create, but in doing so, he had performed his most public act of sovereignty yet. And somewhere in the wounded, watching darkness of the city, the sower of discord had finally gotten a clear look at the physician who was healing his blight. The silent war was no longer silent. The king was on the field. And the enemy now knew his face. Chapter 15. The Dusk Before the Dawn. The days following the Chaos Villain incident were a study in quiet tectonic shifts. There was no public acclaim for Izuku Midoriya. The official street, Ori held firm. Veteran heroes had weathered a psychological storm through training and resilience. But in the undercurrents of the hero world and the deeper channels of the internet, whispers flowed. Grainy screenshots of the calm boy with a razor head were analyzed on obscure forums. Theories bloomed in the dark soil of online speculation. A new kind of support quirk, a secret UA project, a phantom who could silence fear itself. At UA, the shift was more intimate. The distance that had once been a wall of awe was now a bridge of profound, quiet respect. His classmates didn't treat him like a normal peer, but they no longer treated him like an alien. He was a strategic asset, a silent cornerstone. When planning exercises, they naturally factored in Midoriya's zone of control. He was part of the foundation. All Might looked at him with a new, somber pride. The sorrowful awe was still there, but it was tempered by a dawning, reluctant understanding. His successor wasn't walking a different path. He was walking the same one, just so far ahead he was already in a different climate. Their training sessions became less about teaching and more about comparing notes, the hammer and tea. He chiseled discussing the same block of stone. It was with Bakugo that the most profound change occurred. He no longer ignored Izuku. He confronted him directly after a joint combat simulation, his usual fury banked to a hot, focused coal. That trick downtown, Bakugo said, not looking at him, but at the scorch marks on the training room wall. The quiet thing. That's not fighting. I know, Izuku said. It's bigger. Bakugo finally turned, his crimson eyes blazing with a fierce, almost painful honesty. It's like you're not even on the same board anymore. You changed the game. My explosions. Todoroki's ice. We're playing checkers. You're editing the rulebook. He took a step closer, his voice dropping. I hate it. I hate that I can't even measure myself against you anymore. The scale's broken. I don't want you to measure yourself against me, Kaken, Izuku said, using the old name deliberately, softly. I never did. Bakugo scoffed, but there was no heat in it. Just a grinding acceptance. Yeah, well, doesn't matter what you want. It's how it is. He looked away, jaw working. Just, don't you dare look down from the creepy shadow throne of yours and think we're not still here. We are. With a damn board you're changing. Remember that. It was as close to acknowledgement, to a fraught, angry blessing, as Izuku would ever get. And it meant more than any praise. But the peace, the integration, was the surface of a deepening lake. Beneath, in the silent depths where Izuku now lived, the pressure was building. The metallic aftertaste of that observing presence from the alleyway lingered in his senses. A psychic splinter he couldn't dislodge. The Umbra confirmed his fears. The Soa was aware. The healing of the hollow warehouse and the quelling of the chaotic battlefield had been declarations of war. The enemy would not leave its physician unchallenged. The summons, when it came, was not a note, but a void. He was in his room, trying to study, when the shadow in the corner opposite his desk thinned. Not like something moved into it, but as if the darkness itself was stretched, diluted. A tunnel was being forced open, not from his side, but from somewhere else. A place of profound, organized silence that felt nothing like the peaceful dark of the world. This was a curated void. An engineered absence. A figure stepped out of the thin shadow. It was a man, tall and impossibly slender, dressed in a suit the color of a starless midnight. His skin was pale, his hair white and fine as spider silk. His eyes were the most unsettling part, large, gray, and utterly reflective. Like liquid mercury, they showed nothing of the man within, only mirroring the room back at Izuku in a distorted, cold panorama. Hello, Izuku Midoriya, the man said. His voice was pleasant, mid-range, and completely devoid of inflection. It was a voice designed to be forgotten the moment it stopped speaking. My employer would like a word. There is no need for alarm. This is simply a conversation between fellow appreciators of the unseen. Izuku was on his feet, the stillness inside him hardening into glacial readiness. Shadows pulled at his feet, ready to rise. The Soa, a faint smile touched the man's lips, a motion that didn't reach his mirrored eyes. A dramatic name. We prefer, the gardener. Growth requires pruning, after all. And fertilizer. He gestured to the void tunnel behind him. He is waiting. It would be rude to keep him. And it would be unwise to refuse in a room with so many shadows. So many potential accidents. The threat was clear. This wasn't an envoy with a message. It was a snare, laid in the heart of his own dorm. He could fight, here and now. But the cost, the potential for collateral damage, for his secret war spilling into the bright halls of UA, was unthinkable. He met the man's mirrored gaze, seeing his own determined, fearful face reflected back. Lead the way. He stepped into the thin shadow. The W, all dissolved not into the cool river of his own travel, but into a sensation of being pulled asterisk, of reality being siphoned away. It was cold, impersonal, and left a greasy feeling on his soul. He urged into a space that defied simple geometry. It was a room, but it had no clear walls, ceiling, or floor. It was an expanse of muted gray, like the inside of a cloud at twilight. The only features were a few simple pieces of furniture that seemed to float in the dimensionless space, 2 chairs and a small table. In one chair sat a man. He was neither old nor young. His features were bland, forgettable, the kind of face that vanishes in a crowd. He wore simple gray robes. He was pouring tea from a plain clay pot into 2 cups. The steam rose in perfectly straight, unwavering lines. Ah, welcome. Please, Sit. His voice was like his envoy's, but softer, warmer, more human, and somehow, that was worse. This was the sower, the gardener, the cause of the sickness. Izuku took the other chair. It was solid, real. The tea smelled of jasmine and damp earth. I apologize for the dramatic entrance, the man said, pushing a cup towards Izuku. Causality can be so loud. This space exists between the ticks of the clock. A place for a quiet talk. He sipped his tea. You have been tending my garden, young king. I must thank you. The corruption had grown, unruly. A tumor, as you rightly sensed. Pruning it was a service. You created it, Izuku said, his voice flat. He did not touch the tea. Create. No, I merely provide the conditions. The light, you see, is so very aggressive. It shouts. It demands. It creates heroes and villains, absolutes and conflicts. And in the sharp divide between those absolutes, in the heat of those conflicts, the shadows suffer. They become stressed, brittle, receptive. He smiled gently. I simply help them realize their potential, to grow into what the light's violence shapes them to be. Anger into thorns, fear into toxins, despair into a hungry void. You're making the dark sick to prove a point. To make a point visible asterisk, the man corrected. The light-based society is a cancer upon the natural state of things. It is unsustainable. It burns itself out, as your precious All Might is doing. My garden is the inevitable successor. A world where the quiet, the subtle, the true power of negation and stillness is recognized. Not as evil, but as the new order. His gray eyes, gentle and insane, settled on Izuku. And you are the unlooked-for miracle. The natural sovereign, the proof of concept. You shouldn't be fighting my garden, Izuku. You should be leading it. The offer was not of alliance, but of succession. He was being asked to become the figurehead of this quiet apocalypse. I heal the sickness. I don't lead it, but you are asterisk the sickness, to them. The gardener said, his tone pitying. You are the end of their world. A power that operates outside their binary of punch and counter-punch. They will never truly accept you. You will always be the shadow in the room, the unanswered question. With me, you would be the answer. The king of a new, quieter, more honest world. He gestured, and the gray space around them shimmered. Images formed in the mist, glimpses of a possible future. Cities not in light or dark, but in perpetual, peaceful twilight. No violent conflict, because descent was gently, discouraged by the ambient stillness. No heroes, because there was no chaos to fight. No individual brilliance, because the collective, quiet dark absorbed all extremes. It was a world of profound, terrible peace. A world without struggle, without growth, without laughter that was too loud or tears that were too sharp. A world without Izuku's mother's worried smiles. Without All Might's booming laugh. Without Uraraka's determined grin or Kirishima's explosive enthusiasm. A world where the quiet wasn't peaceful, but final. I see your garden, Izuku said, standing. The stillness inside him was no longer calm. It was a focused, razor-edged cold. It's a cemetery. You haven't made things grow. You've just killed everything that makes too much noise. The gardener's gentle smile didn't falter. A harsh aesthetic judgment, but a predictable one from one still clinging to the light's dying sparks. He set his cup down. I did not expect your conversion today. I only wished to meet you. To show you the path you are, inevitably, already walking. Every time you use your power to silence a conflict, to heal a wound the light caused, you are pruning the old world and making way for the new. You are my greatest cultivator. Even in your defiance, the mirrored envoy appeared again, standing at the edge of the gray space. The conversation is over, the gardener said. You will be returned. Consider my words, and know that my garden continues to grow. The next bloom will be in a place you cherish. A place of bright, fragile light. And you will have to choose, young king, will you prune it to save the light? Or will you let it grow, and finally understand that to truly heal the world, the old tree must at last be cut down? The gray space dissolved. Izuku was thrust back through the cold tunnel, landing stumbling in his dorm room. The shadow in the corner was just a shadow again. He was alone, shaking, the taste of jasmine and damp earth clinging to his tongue. He had met the enemy. And the enemy had not threatened him with force. He had offered him a crown, and shown him that every good deed he performed was watering the seeds of a world he would hate. The cliffhanger of the battlefield was over. The cliffhanger of the council room was past. Now, he stood on the precipice of a terrible, silent war of ideologies, where his every act of healing could be twisted into an act of cultivation for a twilight empire. And the first bloom of the gardener's next flower was coming, to a place of light he cherished. The dusk of his old life was over. The true, long HT of the Shadow Monarch's reign was about to begin, and his first duty would be to protect the very dawn he was destined to eclipse. The end.